All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am joined today by my friend Michael Smith. I've gotten to know Michael very well over the past couple months. He's bought a couple of my bags, and he is a big time boot guy. He's an IT guy, and so he has a very weird foot type. He has a very hard time fitting certain boots, and so his level of understanding for boot fitting is probably beyond mine or beyond the vast majority of people out there. He's a very smart guy, and I invited him on my Boot Talk today to share his experiences and his stories with not only sizing boots, but his knowledge of different companies and their lasts and the build constructions, because he offers a really good, highly detailed, highly granular insight into a lot of these companies and how their boots are made and how they can get to fit a difficult to fit foot. So, Michael, welcome to my channel today, my friend. It's my honor to have you, and I'm really excited for this talk.
Thanks, Dale. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Why don't we get started? Kind of share your journey. You've been collecting boots since for about almost 3 years now. You've kind of fell into this because you had foot injuries, correct? That you needed to remedy with high quality boots. Then you sort of started collecting. You had some trials and errors, but it's brought you to a level of understanding that I think is, unmatched in a lot of cases. So why don't you start out by sharing your boot journey and how you got to here?
Yeah, sure. So it all started in 2019 when I, over the years, had numerous sesamoid injuries, broken the sesamoid bones in both feet, some years multiple times. And so I'd started with a place called the Hureska Shoe Clinic. They are out of Nebraska. It's a orthopedic podiatrist, one of the best in the world, where they put out a list of tennis shoes each year that there's like 6 categories, and they gave you kind of the best options that were available. And then I paired that with a American company called Foot Levelers that you can do through a podiatrist or a chiropractor that will do a custom mold foot leveler orthotic for you that raises not only your metatarsals and your toes, it does your heel and your arch in the correct foot geometry. And I was replacing those very high quality tennis shoes 3 times a year to kind of deal with the problems and to avoid the nagging injuries. Because while breaking your sesamoid bones, they're little pea-sized bones. There's 2 of them, and they track your big toe. They don't cast you or anything like that, but it does make you limp on that foot for probably 6 to 8 weeks. And there's really not a lot they can do with it short of kind of just let it heal, try to stay off of it, so on and so forth. And so I got to the point where in 2019, I think I started having this problem. The first time I broke the bones in the right foot were 2014, but it was probably around 2018 that I'd kind of gotten tired of the song and dance of $350 to $400 a year on shoes. And it's like, there has to be a better option here. I don't think Rose Anvil had cut one of them in half yet, but I believe it was Wrangle Star that I had seen a video about NICKS boots. And I'd also seen at the time I hadn't left Cerner yet, or was just getting ready to leave Cerner. They're a big healthcare IT company. There was a video from one of their main competitors, Epic, and the very large Kaiser Permanente healthcare system in California, that one of their doctors, who was a foot surgeon, was talking about sending a customer to NICKS for one of their shoes to deal with foot problems. So that's actually kind of what got me looking at all this stuff first. And NICKS wasn't even my first purchase. It was actually a pair of whites. So I was looking through, and I ended up, at the time, it was called the MP Service Boot with a cap toe. Now it's the MP Sherman. And then later they had the MP Stewart, the plain toe, that I think they've gotten rid of the name of as well. So I ordered a pair of those. Obviously, it was a very long, nowhere near the 24, 28 weeks of those now. I think it was 12 or 13 weeks at the time in 2019. Maybe it was 9. It was still long, but not quite as long. And so I did the foot tracings and the traditional stuff everybody tells you to do. Sent it in. They gave me some information, ordered off what whites told me to order. 4 tries of that, of different combinations of the 7 double E Berry Last, 7.5 double E Berry Last, and all the tweaking that they could do to it. And none of it fit right. Now, the Berry Last is very specific to a foot. It's much like the True Balance, where you need a very specific arch length to get your ball to sit in the correct position. If you don't have that correct heel to ball on the Brannick device that they use, which FYI, the branding device is not a good measurement for anything besides length. If you take anything away from this, I would very highly recommend not trusting the branding device that much.
I agree.
Not only is its widths wrong for certain aspects, the length isn't correct, and there's a very specific reason as to why. I continued along, went through multiple pairs of those, and at the time I'd also put a pair of NICKS on order, and all 4 of those got sent back to whites, and I never ended up keeping that boot, which is a good thing. It's not a good boot for anyone with a wide foot and anyone that has longer toes. The True Balance Last suffers some of the same problems. It's nowhere near as bad, but some of that's also because as you expand widths in Alden, they are very bad about adding extra length. And a lot of that's to keep the boot proportional, but some of it is also to compensate for, some of it's to also compensate for where they add the extra gimming on the insole to make it work, to add some of that width out to get it to round and last on a machine last. Adds the extra length. It's one of the big reasons why the Pacific Northwest guys, here's a pair of whites bounty hunters here. These guys, this is a hand lasted boot. You can always tell because of this roll right here. This roll is a Norwegian roll well. It actually maintains the stitches that holds the insole to the midsole and to your actual, outsole at the end. This is actual functional.
Okay.
These, since they're hand lasted, they can add width without worrying about the extra length. But on anything machine lasted, there's a very strong chance you will gain almost half a length for every width you go up, just due to how the machine has to last it. Now, also, if you notice, this is a 6.5 double F, and this is stretched to a triple F. This is not a very proportional looking boot. Obviously, and then I've obviously pushed this outside out even more. So there is a term here. So when you see it from this perspective from above, this edge here is called the feather line. And you'll hear really high-end makers talk about it. There's a specific phrase that a bunch of the guys in the industry use called always, follow the feather line and then wider below. It's like TFAB, something around those lines. And that's this. Now, on these double stitch boots, the feather line's not a big deal. But if you take like your Aldens you have there and flip them upright on a dressier boot, you'll notice that when you look at it from that perspective and this perspective, there's not this long gap here. And you'll see towards the edges, you always want everything to stay within the feather line. So if you look just past the third eyelet on the pair Dale is holding, at no point do you see his boot push over the edge of that feather line. It is still holding the feather line. If at any reason you saw this, like right here, I am real close to pushing over the feather line right here. If that was pushing over the feather line, you should be on the next size.
Gotcha. Okay. So just for clarification, I've never heard the term feather line in my life. Yeah. It's right here.
Yeah. So if you hold the boot just like I'm holding it right here.
Yeah.
And you look, your feather line is if you take the third eyelet in your right hand. Okay. Right there, you see how the upper, as you roll down, the feather line is the top of your welt. And you don't want your upper to squeeze over that feather line like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see yours is close. So if you turn it just a little bit more like I'm holding it here.
Yeah.
And then you see how right here on yours, you just see that tiny little bit of welt down there.
Yes.
That's the feather line. So if your upper squeezes over the edge of the welt, you've passed the feather line.
Okay.
Yeah, you're real close. So that's about a perfect fit there in terms of width.
Okay.
Especially on a Goodyear welted boot, because as you push over the feather line, your foot is going to sit on, there's a difference between Goodyear welting and flat welting, but on a Goodyear welting boot, you will be sitting on gimming at that point, which will be a slightly uncomfortable bump. If it's a hand cut hold fast on like a Bespoke boot or a flat welted hand welted boot, there will not be anything there because the flat welt actually sits in a channel that matches its thickness up with the insole. So for looks, it's important, but it's not as important in terms of, comfort.
Okay. Gotcha.
So, yes. So that's kind of like a technical detail on the building. So the other problem you're going to have on something like the Very Last is a low arch. This is a 55 here. It's a high arch. Here is something that is more similar to the Very Last here. Even on a boot like this that has minimal arch support, when you first put them on, your ball should be past this first eyelet, but in this area here for correct flexing. This will move forward. So when this arch eases, you will slide forward about a half an inch. So you need enough space, which is usually a man's thumb, or anywhere from 5/8 to 3/4 of an inch in front of that. As this arch eases, you will slide forward. So you need that space. Like, just going down a size for most people is fairly safe, because usually it's 1/8 of an inch roughly. And the handmade boots, obviously, there's going to be a little bit more variance. Sometimes it's going to be less than 1/8. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit more. They always got to kind of be careful.
Yeah.
But you need enough space that you're not touching the front of that toe box, because if you're touching the front of the toe box, you're going to end up calling what's blacking out your toes. You'll lift your toenail off and turn the front of your toes black.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what I'm wearing? So I'm gonna try to show it. I'm wearing my whites MPs today. I shouldn't have worn them, because I should have used them for video for visual purposes. But just today, like, speaking about how the arch eases, this is probably about the 15th time I've worn these, and for some reason I put them on today, and I just decided to feel the toe, and my toe is much closer to the front now than when I started wearing the boots. I had probably like 3/4 of an inch in front of my toe. Now there's probably like less than half an inch. My toes are much closer to the front of the boot now that the arch has eased up a little bit. And that's fascinating. I've never heard that before, but that's really invaluable information right there.
Yes. And like I said, it's really important. You always need at least 5/8 in the beginning.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sometimes a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. So these are my NICKS, and they also have a high arch in here. And same thing. Well, I haven't worn these in probably a month, but I bet you if I go to wear these again, my toes probably even closer to the front. That's fascinating.
Even low arch boots like Grant Stone, for example, they will ease forward as you wear them a bit too. Obviously not as much. There's a steel shank in there, but as you make that footprint, you will move forward as that footprint gets made, just nowhere near as much. Obviously, we're not talking, close to half-inch movements like you'll see in the Pacific Northwest guys, but there is a forward movement in that process that is, something that everybody's got to be a bit cognizant of.
Okay. So, I gotcha. Wow. Well, thank you. That's new. And like I said, every time I talk to you, I learn new stuff. I'm like, I didn't even know this was a concept in boots. But that's what's so good about your very technical mind. You understand things at a much deeper level than most of us common guys would, outside of being a boot maker, which I'm not, you're not, but I could guarantee you, if you wanted to walk into NICKS and start making boots, you'd probably catch on in about a few days.
I could at least do the sanding stuff.
Yeah, definitely. When you talk, you sound like somebody that works at NICKS or whites. And what you were saying about the what did you say, the hand welted portion on the whites?
Yes. So they call it stitch down hand welt. Some people call it Norwegian roll welt. Yes,
that's right. When I first got my whites, I was a little concerned with that, because I thought it was a storm welt. It was really sort of sloppy looking. But then my buddy Jimmy, he sent me all this information as to how, no, that's by design, like it's functional. But the way you outlined it there was very clear, makes a lot of sense. From a cosmetic standpoint, it looks like it's sloppily done, but actually no, that's like by design, and it has a function. So,
and let's talk about that a little bit. So part of the reason this is here is this is actually there's when you look real close at this, there's two pieces of leather here. One is the leather upper that is flattened out. One is the piece that's stitched on. So when you get a pair of whites, so the whites does the machine stitch down. So my Baker's 65th Tuscanel horse rump, which I have in the other room, those are machine stitched down, like what you traditionally see from NICKS, FRANKS, whites, JKs, all those Spokane guys, even West Coast. But when you talk about this hand welt guy here, there's actually a second piece of leather that's done in the hand welt process, so that when they flare it out to do this portion of the stitch, you have your original upper, and then above it, that kind of sloppy piece that it looks like in the beginning, because it really does, especially if you do like a waxed flesh or something, it is going to look really weird, because like here's a roll top wax flesh. it is not a pretty looking roll top. And it was like, it's a little flatter now, but it was a very, as you can see from this side, it's a very square roll top. This is a cinnamon wax flesh. So like, this is not like the prettiest roll. So on a smooth leather, you will get a nicer looking roll than you will on a waxed flesh. In that process, when they fold it out and they welt that piece on this way, what happens is once the piece is welted on like this in the second leather, when they roll that over, that bump is what is containing the stitches that are going through the insole right here. That's what the bump is for. And it also lets them re-welt it. Now, problem is you could potentially, on one of these, you could potentially re-welt one without a rebuild. Problem is, do you have enough space here on what's left of the traditional stitch down that is still here, and what's left on the midsole to do a re-welt without a rebuild? Is it possible? Yes, but most likely, especially if they sand too close on these stitches, what's most likely going to happen is the rebuild needs to happen anyway, just because there's not enough material left to continue doing that process on. But you might get away with putting a new piece on once to avoid a rebuild.
How many times do you think a pair of whites could be resold, reasonably speaking, before it just gives out altogether?
So there's always the rebuild option, right? So this is a pair of FRANKS here. This blue, good, it shows up real good on camera. So we talk about a rebuild here. What they do is they cut along this stitch line here and then counter cover this piece right here, which is the vamp that connects to the uppers, and toe cap, and all this hardware here and here, and the counter cover that's under the counter itself under the counter cover, and the entire bottom is redone. So the only thing you keep is this upper piece here. And this is one of the hardest parts to break in anyway, and they replace everything else. And that's what they call a rebuild. They can also do the backstay and your tongue.
Yeah.
Here's this is a Cobalt Dale's Leatherworks kiltie here.
Yes.
The actual tongue under there, this piece right here can be replaced as well for a charge. But basically the only thing they don't replace is the actual two side pieces of the uppers. And that's what's called a rebuild. It's about $100 more. Not counting any specialty leathers, about $100 more than a regular resole. So that's always an option, right?
Okay.
So the life of the boot, in terms of resoles, you will probably get 2 before you need a rebuild. But that's not so much due to like lack of leather or anything. That is more due to just how beat up the uppers are down there at the bottom, that there just isn't as much life left in them. Now, for guys that wear these more casually, like you and me, you could probably get 3 or 4 resoles out of it before you're ready for a rebuild, unless you want a size change, because they can do a size adjustment and a rebuild as well. Oh, it does have to be relasted. Yeah.
Yes. I've heard about that. It's the relasting process. When I was doing my resole with Brian, the bootmaker, I asked him about relasting, and it's like a $250 charge to relast for him, what he was doing. It's something that's possible. I've never had a pair of boots relasted, but I do have some that I would like to have relasted for, sizing to improve the fit and things like that. So, but that's interesting about the rebuild. I wasn't familiar with that process very well. Like, I know that a good cobbler can, swap panels out and stuff like that, but I didn't realize that NICKS actually offers that as a service. Like, oh yeah, we'll take that piece off, slap a new one.
Yeah, I think all the Pacific Northwest guys do. I'm pretty sure Westco, JK, FRANKS, Whites, NICKS, and even Baker's Boots in their shoe shop, they all offer rebuilds. And like I said, when you order a rebuild, they'll ask you, anything you want to adjust in sizing, you want to take width off, you want to add width. If you didn't have a toe cap, do you want a toe cap? If you didn't have a safety toe, do you want a safety toe? Does your safety toe need to be replaced? All kinds of stuff like that. They can do a lot of that. And they can, if you go and talk to those guys, most of them all do other brands as well, not only their brands. I think the only time I've heard any of them restrict to just a single brand is when NICKS was like 36 weeks back on rebuilds. They were only rebuilding NICKS at that point. Most of the brands all the time will do those rebuilds, and cobblers can do some of this work. A lot of times they won't have the original last. They'll have something that's close. So if you've seen a guy on YouTube, his name is Steve from Vito's Leatherworks. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his last name.
Steve Vito.
Yeah, he does a wonderful job of doing sizing adjustment on like Goodyear welted boots. Now, that being said, on a flat welted boot, because the insole is hand cut, making size adjustments on it is next to impossible. You almost need to make a new hold fast to do that. There is some wiggle room for adjustment, but if you're not using like a gimming that can easily be moved or stitched down where they can just put a bigger or smaller last in, anything that's a hold fast style, which is going to be a lot of your Indonesian makers like Brian the Bootmaker, Gabbard from KREOSOTE Boots, or any other like bespoke shoemaker, you will need to actually adjust the insole to really adjust the size on that. There's things they can do in very bespoke style techniques to make it work. But those adjustments you see Steve do where he's like taken an E and made it a triple E, that is specifically done because it's just a flat insole that he can change out, and he has enough room to move the gimming. Some people call it jimming. I don't know what the actual pronunciation is.
It is gimming, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's the term most of them use, but I have heard some people call it a jimming.
It looks like I read it naturally as gemming, but no, I've had cobblers correct me so many times. No, it's gemming.
But so it's like I said, they can move it over to kind of give some extra width and stuff. Now, adding length obviously is impossible. Taking length away does require, functioning on the insole itself. And it's also interesting, like if you see someone take a toe cap out on a really collapsing toe cap like this, this one right here, you can see that there's nothing there, and it's correct. But if you see like a really hard lump here, or like this is like really flat and not curled in like this, that's because someone's taken the Celastic toe puff or steel toe out, and all of that's flattened with all that extra material squishing out.
Okay, I got
or someone's a cobbler's made adjustments to the length without removing the extra leather.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, these are my Viberg 2030 service boots in brown chrome XL, and I realized that they're just a half size big on me, but I have such an emotional sort of bond with these boots. I've had them since 2014. They're really sentimental to me, but yeah, they are just a little long. It's a stitch down welt, so I'm wondering if I were to have these relasted, they'd be able to shrink it by about a half size. But my concern is with the toe cap, if they needed to reduce the length, they essentially have to make the toe cap move like up here. It might look funny, you know what I mean?
It will look funny with a toe cap. They'll probably want to replace that leather. Now, brown chrome XL, that's not a hard, you're not, at least it's not like shinky horsehide or something, right? That a US cobbler or bootmaker is going to have trouble getting a hold of. But they would replace that leather, and it could very easily be done. That's not a hard process. Like I said, if you were to send it into someone like FRANKS, I think right now it's $280 plus shipping. And just tell them the leather that you need, or you can maybe pick a different leather. Maybe you want to go like slightly two-tone and put some like chestnut latigo in there, or just have them order some brown chrome XL. Or nice thing about FRANKS, you can do customer provided leather.
Really?
Yes.
Oh shoot, I might.
You could do a whole boot out of customer provided leather. So
wow, that might be something to do then, because I have some brown chrome XL, some chocolate chrome XL. I have some black chrome XL. Oh man, you got the wheels spinning in my head now. I might actually do that to try to salvage these, because I watched a lot of Vito's videos, and I actually met with Vito a couple months ago, and he was repairing a pair of old leather sneakers, and the customer, he had to charge the customer like $400 to redo these sneakers. And he's saying like, this just isn't worth it, but who decides what's worth what? He had to put a ton of work into those to restore them. But the customer just really wanted to keep them. He had such a sentimental connection with them, with the sneakers, and he just really wanted to extend their life. And so Vito took the job on, like he says, everything's possible with leather, with boots and stuff. He's like, anything's possible. I could do anything, it's just work. It's just a lot of work to restructure some of this stuff and restore some of it. So
yeah, some of those resizings of his, I've seen them go into the $800 range pretty easily, especially if they're talking about like replacing eyelets and adjusting like the French binding and stuff. It can definitely get up there. I mean, the Pacific Northwest guys are a little bit more utilitarian. They can do pretty much all of it. And the problem with stitch down really is they don't necessarily need the original last, but they need something there. There has to be something that's somewhat the shape to go in. And then there's guide marks he can use from there to really make it work. For his resizing mechanisms, obviously Goodyear welt is a little more simple. because he doesn't have a giant like factory of lasts sitting there available where guys like NICKS and FRANKS and, you know, Whites, especially Whites has a whole thing on a tour you can do where you can see all their historical lasts that are like out of service and lasts that have been retired. You know, he doesn't have a giant library of lasts to find something that's really close or the micro adjustments you want to make. And the other thing is without having lasts available, you know, FRANKS especially, they're really, this is a common thing for them if you do their custom last or custom fitting. A lot of times when they buy the last and they put the leather on it and build it up for you, they leave it on there for you and just get another last of the same size ordered. Especially, you know, if you're a guy like me that's up to okay, the next 2 pairs that are coming, I'll be with 8 pairs of FRANKS now, something like that.
Whoa, really?
Yeah.
8 pair.
Yeah. So well, I have a couple work pairs that I use outside, like the one pair of wedge sole boots I own, which I actually have a second pair of these on order in 6-inch. This is my just like black work leather ground pounders. And this pair is a triple F. These work leathers, I prefer the little bit more space. And I have a 6-inch pair in Wicket and Craig Zucchini coming. So I have a second, you know, wedge isn't my favorite. This pair has been rebuilt once. So this pair has gotten beaten down. Like I got this pair back in April of this year. 10 hours in the data center, 12 hours in the data center.
Yeah.
Raining outside with the dogs or anything else that I don't want my good veg tan being screwed with. This is what I wear. Nice. Only thing I do have the black shinky horsehide. Dale's Leatherworks Kilty. That's the weekend logger for the couple that you've probably made. I know that wasn't one super popular, but I did do the weekend logger. You can see the little notch there.
Yeah, the little notches. Yes, that's Jimmy's design. Did I send you those or were those from Jimmy?
Those are from you, actually.
Okay, that's right.
The brown shinky ponies that I have in this guy and my chestnut Latigo, those were from Jimmy.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, I remember that's the only weekend logger I ever made was for you. Yes, I remember doing it once. So that's awesome. That's a cool design. He really came up with some good kilty designs. I just have dies for the basically the standard and the long kilty.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about having dies made, especially for the jagged toothed kilty design. Those are really hard to hand cut, but those weekend loggers, those are simple. It's just basically I take one notch out of there and it's good to go. So yeah, the kilties, I love making them. They're so simple. You know, I have this, I don't know if I showed you my press, but yeah,
I think I saw it in an Instagram post. Yeah. It's the little Weaver Mighty Machine.
Yes, the master tool. Yeah, that thing can press it's got 800 pounds of pressure that it can really stamp out some nice thick patterns. And it's just a dream come true. It really saves me a lot of time. But yeah, I need to just order more dies. You know what I mean? I need more dies for more products, but that'll come with time. So
one thing on the weekend logger I would suggest for people that are interested in it is with a longer boot, it's going to show better. So I have a fairly short boot. Obviously those notches hide their way back in a little bit. But one thing that you could potentially do is you could move holes for the laces about probably 1/4 of an inch back, and that will make that stick out a little bit more.
Okay.
And for the short boot guys, for a longer boot, it won't make any difference at all. But on the short boot, because the uppers are going to close in just a little bit more, moving those holes back just a little bit will for the short boot guys. Stick it out just a smidge more.
Okay, and that's actually really good feedback because I have this original die from Jimmy and it doesn't have the holes. As you can see, this has the holes built in. This does not. So I could make custom adjustments based on whatever anybody needs. But man, I gotta say, like the holes, this is a game changer because like it saves me probably 6 steps in making the kilties because I'd have to take my original pattern, poke the holes where they need to go, then hand stamp each hole, and then they're done. Whereas with this, it's just done after one stamp. So it really cuts down on the amount of time that I have to put into it. But yeah, I still retain the original. So if any unique adjustments need to be made, I could still do that as well. So
it's also good too because you don't want any hand slips that cause that real quick. Oh man, those holes aren't centered. That's a funny thing about boots. We all kind of get up in arms about like stitching and like the how nice everything looks and how good it all looks together. But realistically, after you wear it 3 or 4 times, you're never going to tell the stitching was off in the first place either, because your leather creases, it starts to fold and move.
It starts to bend and contort. And yeah, the exactness of the stitching isn't going to really matter after a month in them. Really, yeah. I mean, literally after like 3 wears, it won't matter anymore. So.
Just an interesting take. I know the Pacific Northwest guys hate when people get really like over the board about the line stitching, because they're work boot companies at the end of the day. I know they're getting more into the casual space, but they still are work boot companies. And realistically, as long as like it didn't just miss the leather and just hit the vamp and miss the upper altogether, it really doesn't matter that much. And once again, anything that's got stitches ain't waterproof. If you're going to be standing in ankle deep water for 10 hours a day, you need galoshes.
Definitely. That's the truth. The NICKS will not protect you if you're in the sewer, going through you don't wear these in the sewer in human waste. Believe me.
Oh yeah, absolutely not. Yeah. It's funny you say that, because that's actually the reason most of them don't do the Norwegian roll welt as much, and why the smoke jumpers are a machine stitched down. It's just an extra hole in the upper for water to get through.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Yes.
Oh, and there is another big point. So if you look inside your NICKS, and you look in real good, like down the hole, you'll see it's called a McKay stitch, but most people these days call it a Blake stitch. It's a McKay chain stitch. You'll see that there is a stitch where you can feel with your hands going around the inside of the boot in there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That roll welt stops you from having to do that. Inside your whites, that doesn't exist.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
They do that because they don't want any nails around your feet, so that they stop all the nails in the double layered arch areas only. It'll be really hard to get that to see on camera, because you got to you almost need like one of those little LED discs that you could put inside there to then show up on the camera.
Yes. Exactly.
But like I said, it's hard in person to get it right. But if anyone has a pair of NICKS, FRANKS, whites that are machine stitched down, not the roll welt, they're the hand stitch down is what they call it, but it's in Norwegian roll welt, you'll see that there is stitches in there. And if you push wide, you might feel them on your toes the first couple times. Like if it's the close to the correct fitting boot, or they're a little too small, you'll definitely feel them under your toes. But they'll flatten down pretty quickly. That's not like a long-term problem by any stretch of the imagination. It's just one of the ways that they were able to take something out by doing that. But it does put holes in the insole, which does allow water to eventually seep in. Because of the fully gusseted tongue, the water's not coming in from the top. And keep in mind, even machine stitch down, especially if your midsole is not like completely sealed and preserved, which wearing it will take all preservatives you put on it, even like a Obanoff's or a Bic more, instead of their Bic 4, their leather preservative, their heavy duty leather preservative, or Obanoff's boot grease, or even like Hubbard's boot grease, that will eventually wear off with abrasions and stuff like that. Once the water starts soaking in there, you'll eventually get wet just by seepage through the leather itself, which is, once again, if you're going to be more than 2 hours at any time completely soaked, galoshes are your friend.
Yes, absolutely. So true. Yeah, because leather is like wood in a lot of cases. It warps over time. It takes in moisture. It changes its shape, and there's really nothing you can do about that. Same with leather. You get the leather wet, it'll swell. That will evaporate out, but then the boot will never quite look the same. I've noticed that with some of my boots that I've got just super duper soaked. Like, that leather swells out, and when it shrinks back down and dries, it never quite looks the same after that. And it's just like wood. It's a natural material. It's beautiful. I love it for its functionality, and it's the way that it breathes and all that, the support it gives you. But at the end of the day, these are living materials. You know what I mean? There's nothing you can do to like change that. You could add more wax, more conditioner, more different products to it for different purposes, but ultimately, this stuff is gonna change the more you use it. So, and that's part of the beauty. So. It
is. Yeah. The other thing is getting boots too wet, while it can help with like the break-in process, it does cause a lot of leather shrinkage.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
It's very much like salvaged jeans that a lot of people are into, especially the unsanforized, or whatever that term is. Getting them wet will cause shrinkage, even if it is. But if it's not, it's going to shrink it more. Leather's the same way, especially veg tan. When you start getting into veg tan, like, not only can like water in its early life stain it, pretty bad, but
Yeah,
you can really adjust veg tan size if you're not careful.
definitely. Yeah, actually, what you're saying has so much truth because, like, these haven't really gotten wet, but this is veg tan Badalassi, saddle tan Grantstones. I notice, especially on, I have a pair here in brown chrome excel. These have shrunk a little bit. These have actually shrunk because they've gotten super duper wet a few times, and I notice it. Like, it doesn't really affect the fit very much, but then again, I size sort of generously, so they fit a little better after they've been wet. But yeah, it's fascinating how it'll shrink back down.
Well, the good news is as long as your foot's in it until it's dry, you're fine.
Yeah.
If your foot's not in it or you don't have a last in it, that's when you screw your size up. This is the big reason why a lot of people tell you not to the old adage of, stand in your boots and walk in them till you're dry. The reason they tell you to soak them and walk them till you're dry is if you take your feet out of them while they're still wet, they won't fit again.
Right.
I've heard that some of the selvage denim guys on the initial soak actually sit in the tub with them to help maintain the fit. So
yes,
it's the same concept there. You really got to be careful of that. That's why most people just recommend breaking in the regular way. The other thing is for the first year, unless you were doing like our next to volcanic ash, large fire sources, or anything that could really dry the boots out a lot, you really don't need to condition the first year, maybe even two. It is not as needed of a process. I mean, there's 1940s vintage leather jackets that people did work in that still don't need conditioning.
Right. Exactly.
Over conditioning is a problem, especially when a lot of new boot owners do it the first time and they start seeing their eyelets and their hooks pulling away from the leather. Conditioning around those guys, because those parts don't traditionally bend. You really don't ever need to condition those areas short of a little bit to keep color uniformity.
Yeah.
Otherwise you risk ripping those out. So
interesting. Yeah, that does make sense. So for example, I watched my buddy Dave, actually, he removed his own eyelets and there's nothing to it. They're actually not very securely, they're not super securely seated in the boot. So for example, I think he did it with some Vibergs. All you do is you take a screwdriver.
Yep.
Yeah, and a hammer, and you just hammer it and they just pop right out. And so yeah, so you got to be careful, like you're saying, with the conditioner, because you can cause a separation there. That they're held in place mostly, correct me if I'm wrong, but through tension. That's how a lot of leather sort of operates, is tension. That's how it sort of flexes and stretches but still holds together, is through tension. And so I might be wrong, but I think that's what's mostly holding these into place.
That and a little bit of crimping. Yeah. So Vibergs, you probably can't see the inside because I think they do what's called an invisible eyelet where the crimp is in between the two pieces. But if you look at, so that's what's called an invisible eyelet. That's a backer there. If you look at your FRANKS or your NICKS, if you have them there available and you flip up the eyelet portion, you'll see the actual crimps themselves on both the speed hooks. And yeah, there you go. So those are the actual crimps there. Yes. So it's this crimp. So what they do is with that backer piece hides the crimps, but it's just called like an invisible eyelet. God. And it's a crimp in there that is, but it's just, as you can see on the speed hooks, it's just like, little tiny crimps there, but that piece doesn't flex. Like the only two eyelets. Yeah, there you go. That's a slightly different style backer, but that's the same thing. That's just a top cap that's hiding the crimps. So those crimps are under that top cap. And there's only the between the fourth eyelet and the first speed hook are the only real risks of like over flexing, because those are the only parts that these Dublins here will show exactly what I'm talking about. The only flexing you're going to get on around your eyelets is going to be usually right about here between the third and fourth eyelet, and where you'll get a little bit of bumping there. Let's see if I can kind of, there we go. Where that's about all the flex you're going to get on your eyelets. Besides that, they're extremely stationary. So like I said, besides kind of the crappier pop metal ones that like Alden and Red Wing and those guys use, which you could very easily get upgraded, by the way. Like guys like Steve at Beto's Leatherworks, and others will cut the French binding, put new ones in. So it's a little expensive, but getting rid of those pop metal ones that'll bend against things like ladders and anywhere you could like kind of get your foot caught is pretty important. And they use ones that are very similar to what you see in the Pacific Northwest guys, which are those, I think they're called studs. but that stud style hook instead.
Gotcha.
Or you could just do all eyelets and, save yourself the trouble.
Yeah, exactly. That would be one way to simplify things. And man, actually, I'm looking now on my Aldens. They actually put a leather panel over the interior of the eyelets there. So that's interesting. I would.
Yeah, the lining goes over it, and there's a little piece of fabric under it that gives it support from the underside and also doesn't squeak against the leather.
No kidding. Oh man. Once again, learning another new thing about eyelets and how different construction methods for different eyelets are applied. I never knew this. I never even noticed that. I would have never noticed that till you brought it up. This is why you had to come onto the channel. You see, I have so many blind spots just because I've never built boots. And even if you did build boots, there's a chance that you just fall into a certain pattern of building that you never consider other construction methods. And there's just so many things like French binding, like you mentioned. And I keep bringing up this analogy. I don't know if it's a good one, but making boots is like making sandwiches. You could use different breads, different meats, different vegetables, different sauces on it. You could bake the bread if you want or not, or there's just so many ways, and it's to your taste, to the maker's taste, to the customer's taste. There's just an infinite amount of ways to put a sandwich together. Same with boots. There is no one method. So.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. No, there's a lot, and there's a lot of reasons why and why not on them. I mean, there's less durable methods, but they're done for a reason. A good example, I mentioned McKay lock stitch. A lot of people know that as Blake stitching. That is done to slim the silhouette down and to not have, to be able to really adjust that feather line with, whether it's like a fake Goodyear welt on the stitch where it's Blake stitched, or it's just a regular glue on welt to give the welt look, which is what most Blake stitches are. It's to make that adjustment in it. Because keep in mind, when you're buying from a bootmaker, while durability, quality materials, all of that matters, at the end of the day, aesthetics are still the main reason a lot of people are buying boots, especially in the heritage boot community. The look you're looking for, like for example, Thursday boots, they have a toe cap boot that's not a toe cap. It's two pieces of leather skived together to look like a toe cap. It gives you the look. Yeah, there's not two pieces of leather there. It's actually skived in the middle and put on there, and it gives you that look, but it keeps a slim silhouette. It's for a purpose. And in that process, this is where some of the stuff changes, but all of this is important, even though this is about sizing, because this is where sizing comes in. So a good example of this is, as I said earlier, this is a non-toe cap. This is chestnut. I've heard it called Latigo. This is oiled from Wicket and Craig. This is chestnut. Beautiful, beautiful pull up, as you can see coming through here. Like this has a real beautiful pull up. Not as drastic as the tan, which I do have sitting over there. Just overall the pull up is fantastic. But in stitch down, this tends to be the preferred method for people with wider feet because there's a lot of toe adjustment that they can do. On a stitch down boot, usually you have 3 to 4 kinds of toes. Now, obviously, some of them are more narrow. This is a number 3 toe here. A work boot would be like a number 4 toe, which is a little bit wider, a little bit taller. But they can make adjustments like that. But when you get into Goodyear welting, it's not as easy. You need the toe-based one on the last, but number 2, it's got to be able to round the Goodyear welting machine. There's a lot of stuff that's done. Because when I say Goodyear welting, most people don't understand it's the machine that's doing it. It's a machine that is lasting it, is a machine that runs it through, whether it's insole stitched or, directly to the actual footbed, or it's done with a gemming. It's still a machine process. That's why flat welting is different. Goodyear welting was invented to save time during the war from doing a traditional hand lasted flat welt. Because when they do it and you take that piece of leather, so there's lots of different kinds of flat welting, by the way. There's what they call German channel welting, which is flat welting. There's English flat welting. There's French flat welting. There's even one they do it in a lot of cowboy boots called Mexican welting. And a lot of times it's just how much leather they carve out, the angle they go in at, so on and so forth. But there's a strong chance that is what's called Mexican welting. And what it is when they do the insole channel and stuff on the bottom is they do 270. Okay. And there's a heel rand, which I could see the heel rand on there. But what they do is the insole, the channeled insole, is 360 degrees on the inside. And then on the back, instead of doing a 360 welt, they still welt it like there's a welt there. But you can't see the stitches because they're just doing insole to upper and skipping the welt portion.
Oh,
So on like an English welt, which is done in a similar fashion, they will just heel rand and stop the welt in the arch area. But in a Mexican welt, they actually do the whole 360. There's just a rand put on top of it at the end because they don't do it through the rand so they can make heel adjustments.
interesting. Oh man. Well, these were made in Mexico.
Yep.
And so it probably is that Mexican welt that you're talking about. Whew.
Yep. I
Fascinating.
haven't seen Chisos cut in half to know for 100% certain, but there's a strong chance because those are in a higher price point. And I know those guys down there really care about the quality of their stuff going through. I would
Yes.
imagine Tacovas in their higher lines are probably very similar. If you want to see the process being done, there is a absolutely fantastic bootmaker down in Austin, Texas. His name is Lee Miller from Texas Traditions. He's got a very long waiting list, but he has some videos up on Instagram of his work. And I think Kirby Allison did a like thing where they watched Lee make his whole boot. And that guy learned from an even older gentleman named Charlie Dunn, which is a really old school bootmaker in the cowboy boot scene. And like that's those are like one of the I think it's the main ones I've heard of are Lee from Texas Traditions. There's a lady from Oklahoma. I think her name is Florence Knight, if I remember right. Then there's also the guys that do the really crazy stuff out in El Paso called Rocket Buster Boots. And they do the super crazy, really colorful uppers. Like they'll do the most insane. Like I saw a pair that I think Sylvester Stallone had that had like the most like Captain America eagle colors on the shaft that you've ever seen. Like kind of in your face, almost comic book style.
I think I know exactly the pair you're talking about. I think I've seen them wearing those. Those are
Badass. Yeah, like I said, they're that's definitely that's a style you've got to really be able to own. But they do some of the craziest, coolest. I also saw recently they did a Day of the Dead pair about a month and a half ago that was absolutely fantastic. Now, that pair I don't know if I'd wear because I don't think the details will show through as the shaft starts, bending and flexing. But they've done some absolutely phenomenal work.
And that's what actually kept me out of the cowboy boot game for so long, is because, like you said, the comic book, almost, comical, clownish appearance to some of these boots, these cowboy boots. They're just so outlandish looking, they purples, greens. It's not subtle whatsoever. The patterning is just, it's almost like they're trying to be as flamboyant as possible. And me personally, I just can't pull stuff like that off. Obviously, somebody like Sylvester Stallone, who he's looking to leave a lasting impression, he can pull something off like that off, like the overtly Captain America style.
I called her Florence Knight. It's Flora Knight is the other bespoke maker. She's in Oklahoma. Makes very, very fantastic boots. She's a little bit more focused on like ladies' boots, but she does do men's cowboy boots. Very, very, like I said, she's probably, Texas Traditions is your very, very traditional cowboy boot. She's probably more in the middle. And then, like I said, Rocket Buster there.
Yeah.
They are the over the top. Like you want something insane, we got you covered. So back on topic, those are the like kind of, there's lots of different welt constructions, right? There's lots of Wise House, what fours. But the main thing is the Goodyear welted process. I don't know if it's this marketing or it is not like this amazingly durable. Everyone should be looking for Goodyear welt. Stitch down is inferior. It's a time saving process for the original hand welted, flat welted boots, and it's called flat welt because a flat welted boot. So you have your insole and you've taken your channel down now here. You take a channel down on the inside so that when you sew it together and you hammer it down, they go flat. And a lot of times on flat welted boots, the amount of cork to the amount of filler they have to put in there is very minimal. There's no huge gap that the gimming leaves, where they're stuffing like an 1/8 inch of cork or more in there.
Gotcha. Yeah. These are my Grant Stone diesels in navy chrome excel. And these are flat welted, but I don't understand enough to be able to comment on the construction, but
you won't be able to see it easily from the outside. It's something you'd see when they cut it in half. The biggest difference is when you squeeze against the side to see the stitches, to see if it's a Goodyear welt. A flat welt will be way harder to see the stitches than a traditional Goodyear welt is, because it's done in such a way that when it's hammered flat, it's a very different style. The gap doesn't seem big on a regular Goodyear welted boot, but when you see it on a non like flat welt boot and you see the gap, it suddenly looks like a giant ravine. Here we go, right here. So that's a pair of KREOSOTEs. And you can see with the lasting process, like there is not a massive gap there on the bottom. Like Goodyear welting has a big gap. There is not a huge gap on these. Oh, here, this one might even be a little bit better. Actually, I'm precious in this one. I'm gonna send you a second. There you go, right there. You got it right there. That's it right there. As you can see, you know, there it's cut in there, and there's not a big like 1/8 inch gap throughout the whole area where the gimming's present. The cork or whatever filler that you request to be used from a guy like Cowboy, he usually does cork, but you could probably ask for something else. Is really only filling the channel seam portion of it. It's not really filling the entire thing. And as you can see, you know, where it's stitched through, the welt is almost entirely flat against the insole channel. It is not like a massive, you know, big piece that pops up that you would traditionally see with gimming. Okay. Now that German style channel welting, that is a bit deeper cut than you would traditionally do with like an English flat welt, for example. And an English flat welt would also be 270 degrees. They wouldn't do 360. Not traditionally. Gotcha. Man. And if you've seen like a pair of Red Wings or like a Truman's or a Grant Stones or something like that, you know, taken off to where you can see the piece under there, there's a lot more gap in there. Like I've even seen ones like Wolverine 1,000 Miles where there's like recycled carpet pad in there, and it's a much thicker cavity there. And so from the outside, short of pulling on the upper leather and pushing to see the stitches, you're not going to see the difference between a flat welt and a Goodyear welt very easily. But the biggest thing is when people are checking for flat welt, and I don't have any. Oh, you know what? I do have one pair of Goodyear welt boots. No, wait a minute. No, these are flat welted. Never mind. So this is my Zeros Type 1 and Natural Chrome XL. It's a 8-inch engineer boot. If you were to go up against the edge like this and squeeze to see the stitches, you can barely see them under there with the flat welt. And I'm squeezing real hard. You can see my fingers turn purple. And you can barely see the stitches in that gap. On a Goodyear welt, those would be way more visible, way quicker.
Okay. How did you accumulate like all this knowledge in such a short amount of time? I mean,
well, so a lot of it started with, I started with those whites boots, right? That didn't work. And then NICKS actually sized me wrong. So I'm a 6.5 double F. In the thicker work leathers, you usually go triple F or a good, very good factory stretch. And they started me in an 8 double E. And I had a bunch of really weird problems with that boot. Initially, they were perfectly fine, except I knew there was like 1 3/8 inches in front of my toe. And I had a lot of really, really weird problems with that boot. Like, so in the beginning, they're super comfortable. They were great. 200 hours in, I was having a lot of pain in my arch. Well, what it turned out was, and it took me a while to figure it out, because that was a Falcon, which is their thing. Their their low arch version. The other pair of theirs I have is the Robert. What happened is because this heel goes farther forward, this is known as the breast line right here, goes farther forward. It was sitting in the middle of my arch. So as I had broken the footbed in, I was now breaking in the front of the heel stack that was pushing into my arch that was giving me foot pain. They were having trouble diagnosing it. I was having trouble diagnosing it. And one day when I just set my foot next to it and said, like, I'm having this pain right here in this portion of the foot. What is the problem? That's where I saw the edge of the stack right there was pushing up into the arch. And that's one of the biggest problems with just like lasting is a science. You talk to a guy like Gabbard from KREOSOTE, Brian the Bootmaker, or there's a guy on Instagram that does a lot. His name's like MacMallan Mr. San, who just showed off a new last technology on Instagram the other day of making last adjustments for people, who it teaches people about last making, or guys like in England that teach like Dominic Casey. He's a bespoke shoemaker and also very well known for his English riding boots. They do last classes that talk about it. And there's a couple things in the last that are 1-to-1 ratios that are math that even though some companies let you adjust, there's reasons why you really shouldn't mess with it. So a good example of this is called the breast line. So in length, this breast line will change a little bit depending on the boot. Now, a lot of normal sizes in like that 8 to 11 range that most guys fall into, that breast line doesn't change much. But in the really big sizes and the really small sizes, this guy matters. The other two parts that are 1-to-1 is your toe spring is equal to your heel height.
Okay.
If you raise or lower the heel and the toe spring isn't adjusted, there's a problem. But realistically, the last has a toe spring and a heel height that it's meant for. If you're wanting to adjust either of those, you should be picking a last that is more complementary of what you're looking for, not trying to adjust a last that you know that fits.
Yeah.
So if you see a bespoke shoemaker doing work, they have this little heel stepper that's this like little like it's probably in millimeters, but it'd be like little tiny like 8 or 16-inch steps where they get the toe spring to heel correct in your foot geometry. So, and this is something I encourage everybody to look up. There are makers you can ask about this. There's a lot of resources on the internet. You know, figuring out your toe spring to heel height, what works best for you, is more about finding the last and not messing so much with the last. Because when you get like a custom boot through someone like Brian the Bootmaker, and with Roll Cub, KREOSOTE with Gabbard, or you get into like actual bespoke shoemakers. And I say actual bespoke shoemakers, those other guys are made to measure. I'm not 100% as familiar with Brian's process. I know he builds and works on the last and does made to measure, but I know Gabbard from KREOSOTE actually calculates and gets your foot geometry correct. And that's what bespoke makers do, is getting your foot geometry right. It's not just, you know, it fitting, but like having like an engineer is a good example. A lot of people do stuff like put their feet in bags to get the boot. Don't do that, by the way. Put their feet in bags to get into engineers and do all these kinds of stuff to get them to fit the first couple times that you really just shouldn't do. If you can't get your foot in, the way they do it in the cowboy boot world and the way that's recommended to do is a bespoke style. So when we talk about like something like clearing the throat, right, which is getting your foot past this part that a lot of people have a lot of trouble with as they're first getting it in.
Yes.
What you do is you should take a hammer, and you could use, if you have a rounding hammer, you could use a rounding hammer, but usually the handle of the hammer, and you massage this part here from the inside. So you sit on the hammer, slide the boot onto it, and massage this part here first. That'll get clearance for it to slide through. And then the next thing you should do, if you're still having trouble, is where, and this is where it's important. This is the same for everybody, right? But wherever your heel is getting stuck in the backstay, you can do the same thing, just this direction against where your heel is getting stuck on the backstay. And that'll give you the clearance to slip your boot in. Don't do bags, don't do grease, none of that stuff. Like there are very delicate capillaries on the top of your toes, especially if you have veiny feet like I do, where you can see the veins on top. That takes weeks to heal. You don't want to only wear your engineers every 6 weeks in between injuries.
Yeah, right. That makes a lot of sense. I've had some issues getting into some of my newer boots, some of my newer Chelseas. Yeah, I need to get a shoehorn down in there to get my foot in. It's tough, but that's the first time I've heard of that hammer method. That's really helpful. I'm sure that'll help a lot of guys out.
Yeah, I mean, I could kind of demonstrate a little bit too, but there's videos out there of it. Even if, say, you don't have a hammer, broomstick, you can sit on broomstick.
That makes sense.
Prefer it to be a wooden one with a rounded edge, not the plastic ones, because you'll probably break or bend like the common ones you see. But if you got like an old wooden broomstick, or a wooden shovel handle will work too.
Interesting. That is awesome.
And there are videos doing, I think there might be a video of Gabbard doing that, and there are videos a lot of the Texas cowboy bootmakers doing that exact same method. So that is an available one you could find on the internet.
Okay, excellent, super helpful. Yeah, because getting into some of those slip-on boots, my Thursday jodhpurs that I just got, I wore them once and my foot got in there no problem, but I put them on a second time and it was hell getting those on, man. That took muscle, and I have a bad back. So if I'm trying to get a really difficult boot on, my back's just not cooperating. I could throw my back out doing something like that.
And another thing that can help a little bit with some of that too is, so on Thursdays, they're going to use this elastic heel counter. So make sure you're using shoehorn. You break that thing, it's done. You'll never not feel that the rest of the life of that boot. But on something that's got a more leather-based heel counter, or a little bit more, I don't want to say quality construction, like Thursday's bad quality, but you know what you're getting at that price range. The shoehorn isn't as important. Like, it'll help get your foot in, but realistically, in an engineer, a shoehorn's not going to help you much, because it's actually restricting the leather's ability to push out to clear that throat. If you're using a shoehorn, you can only massage the throat of the instep. If you massage the backstay all you want. If you're using a shoehorn, you can't push into it anymore. I don't mean it in a bad way, but common sense kind of things. Like don't massage, areas you obviously can't. Because keep in mind, when you massage it, it is going to create a somewhat visible bump there. And as you wear it, obviously it'll blend in and everything, but you're doing this to be able to break boots in. Keep in mind, world competition winning shoes are not meant to be worn on human feet. Yeah. that's how they keep the proportions and everything perfect. I'm not joking about that. There's the World Series of shoes in the dress shoe world. The World Series of shoes. They make these shoes each year that bespoke makers around the world do. And they just finally did it this year for the first time after missing a couple years due to the worldwide pandemic. They're actually shoes that just elastos, and they're not meant to go on human feet. Like you'd have to surgically alter your feet to fit in these. There's all about proportions and high quality shoemaking. They're not even shoes that are designed to crease correctly if they were worn. They're just, people showing off their skills. An important note is like when we talk about design and we talk about like how a boot should fit, a lot of times boot makers, to get a specific look, do stuff that is not conductive to, I don't want to say comfort, but like to things creasing in the way that they're supposed to crease. A lot of times, as I said earlier, aesthetics are why most people buy boots. Otherwise, we'd all buy, a pair of white NICKS FRANKS work boots and just beat the ever living tar out of them and not care. Because if you see those guys' boots after 3 months, they don't like. It's funny that they liked getting their colors and show them off when they first get them, because in 2 months you can't tell what color that boot was. Right. Originally supposed to be, but which is fine. Hey, more power to them. I like it, man. If they want to do a two-tone boot and rock that for a couple weeks until you can't tell it's two-tone, go for it.
Exactly. Yeah, and this brings up a subject that is fascinating to me, which is how any leather, regardless of what color it starts out originally, it all seems to evolve into the same sort of brown leather. Give it enough time, give it enough centuries, it'll eventually turn back to brown. That's something that really took me a while to digest, because it's like, yeah, you look at some of these really old boots, regardless of what color they started as, the brown, it might be a dark brown, it'll fade into a lighter brown. A light brown will darken into a darker brown, and eventually they all sort of come towards this unifying look, unifying color.
Yeah. It's probably something to do with the tannage, if I had to guess, like what it is tanned with. It'll probably, like all chrome tans will end up a specific chrome tan color. All veg tans will end up a specific veg tan color. It probably has to do with whatever tanning materials it is. But yeah, I mean, once again, it's leather. We want the fibers and the porous structure of it, and the fact that, like, unlike synthetics, it can flex a million times and maintain its shape. A big misconception with break-in is a lot of people think break-in has to do with comfort, but really what you're actually doing with break-in is creasing the areas that you want to crease, which will lower those areas' durability, but maintaining the durability everywhere that it's not supposed to crease.
Yes. A little bit more about your size. So you had those medical issues with your feet, but I take it, though, since you ordered so many of those FRANKS, that you found a good size that fits you perfectly, right?
Correct. So they have a last that has a couple customizations for me. Like, for example, a 6.5 double F technically can't have a number 3 toe. They have built a number 3 toe on it to have something like a toe cap. So this is, as you can see, it's not your traditional looking number 3 toe. This is built off one that has the faux number 3, and it's closer to a number 4. Whereas if you compare it, like this one right here, this is a pair of NICKS. If you look, their toe shape is not the same, and that's not even just counting the toe cap. So there are things that they do to make that kind of stuff work, and I do have some stuff that's a little different. Like I have a definitely closer to a triple F heel, so they've got a little bit more heel room for me. When it came to fit, and this is really kind of where it gets hard, right? There's all this stuff they tell you about fit in the real world, and oh boy, it's 2 in the hand, one is worth 1 in the bush kind of deal.
Yes.
When you find a fit that works, a lot of times people just stop and like, okay, this is my brand, I'll stick with it. But figuring out why is really important too, because so in my case, most people, the ball is the widest part of their foot, right? So it's where the ball is. So you have room to move that ball back and forth. So you can go a size bigger, a size smaller, that ball can move. But on my foot here, Mine has a little bit of a difference to it that can be problematic. And for a lot of people, this will especially if you're someone that has bunions and stuff, this will 100% be the case for you. But it doesn't just apply to people with like medical foot anomalies. It is simpler than that at the end of the day.
Each of your feet are slightly different sizes too, right?
Correct. My left foot is almost a half size shorter than my right foot, but my left foot is a width wider than my right foot.
Wow.
That's really not super duper uncommon. I mean, like I said, if you're not in horsehide, that's another good thing. Do not order horsehide until you 100% know your size. Horsehide does not stretch.
Right.
Cow leather, you get to stretch. So as you can see, my foot does fit on, in terms of length, fits on a piece of regular graph paper. But if you can see, I have a side protrusion on each foot, which is just my foot splaying out, that exists along the side that's actually wider along the throat in the instep. So if I was to do a common method that people say, oh, you need more width, go up a size. The problem is the heel cup gets longer. So it pushes that protrusion deeper in the heel cup, which actually makes the fit even worse. So it is important to understand why. If it's just a ball thing, that ball can move a little bit in there and you're good to go.
Right.
But for a lot of people, it's more than just the ball. And another big problem is if you go a size bigger and you have a large instep, you are actually pushing your instep more into the lacing process, which will be way less comfortable than the instep being a little bit more forward. Because as you get a longer boot, your instep is going to go more into where the speed hooks would traditionally be. And we pull a lot tighter where the speed hooks are than we do where the eyelets are.
Yes. That's a fact.
Just like this, the little weird things like that, it's important to kind of understand the whys.
Yeah.
It also gives you a mechanism to talk to the makers about too, you know, kind of get their feedback. Because for a lot of people, their sizing is solely based off what is your brandic length or whatever the length you give them the measurement and what's your ball size. Here's your size.
Exactly.
But filling out the volume of the boot correctly is important, because if you don't, that's where the uncomfortableness gets. Like if you're touching uppers together, what happens is you're doubling up layers that are pressing down on the top of your foot. You can damage those capillaries. Not to mention, it doesn't look good. There's a lot of, even on brands like Clinch, for example, where it's designed to be real close together.
Yeah.
When they're real close together, you have very little wiggle room on sizing. There's also brands that it's meant to be a little bit wider, but if it's too wide, once again, you are pulling those laces directly across the top of your foot and creating a bunch of pressure points if you have a 3-inch gap there too.
So true.
So, I mean, you've got to kind of find the happy median of here and why. And there's a reason why the work boot brands do hand cut uppers if you're a funky size.
Right.
You know, not just like the standard D width in the world and the wide to narrowing kind of reverse teardrop shape that most people's feet are supposed to be. There's other little weird anomalies there too. And like I said, having the boot flex in the points that it's meant to flex helps as well. Where is, like, you know, length in terms of not getting too short is important. Getting a little long can be possible. The other issue you run into a little bit there is a lot of times there is a shank cover, or sometimes what's known as a slip sole. So this is a wedge boot here. And as you can see where it splits here, there is a split sole along the length of that boot. There's 2 layers of leather here, and it breaks down to 1 right there.
Okay.
Now, if you got that too long, you might try to flex on that split sole, and you definitely don't want that.
Right.
From my face here. So there we go. Put it from my face. Stop blurring it.
Yeah.
And you can see where it does it right there. So like I said, while going long could help you on width, it can also cause that problem of you trying to flex on something that's just not meant to flex. There is a natural break in the boot. It is a little negotiable, but it's not like forever negotiable, right? Like it's not that simple in terms of you can just do this, you can just do that. You know, the reason a lot of people say go half a size down and a width up, which I know is a popular Grant Stone one, is because most people size their tennis shoes too big in the real world.
Yes.
No more than a thumb. So a lot of times they tell people that is they know if they take a tennis shoe size and translate it over directly, there's a good chance they could maybe even go down a full size if they had to.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, tennis shoe sizing. Oh man, I'll never forget one time I went to a tennis shoe store. This was probably back in 2010, and I was trying to figure out my size, and I'm putting on I put on shoes from 7 to 10. You know what? That because of the padding on the inside, I couldn't tell what was supposed to be my right size. Like the 7s were tight, but I wasn't sure if that's what I want. Like they were so tight, I could barely get my foot in there. But I wasn't sure in the long term what is most conducive for like a running type shoe. And so most sneakers, I'm just a 9, that's just what I kind of go with. But when it comes to boot sizing, the volume matters so much. And, being that there isn't all that padding on the inside of the boot, getting your volume just right is crucial, because that's how your foot is going to sit, how that boot is going to house your foot over the long term. And yeah, looking at your measurements, actually, like your ball is not the widest part of your foot.
Nope, not even close. My instep's the biggest, but my waist is huge too.
Yeah, your waist is like, oh man, that's crazy. No wonder like you have a hard time sizing. It's because like your ball is like up here, but your waist is here, and it's by far the widest part of your foot. And so no wonder you need the double F and sometimes the triple F.
Yeah. So for those that don't know the Pacific Northwest guys, double F is 4E and triple F is 5E.
Okay.
Wow. In the other brands that you hear of.
That is so crazy, but super useful. I'm sure, a lot of guys out there, they just have the hardest time with sizing. And your sizing story is definitely one of the most arduous that I've heard thus far. So
yeah. So actually, I didn't even finish explaining that one all the way. So like I said, I had the issue with the heel. So I sent those back to NICKS. They're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. And it's like, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with the boot itself, but something about it's not right for my foot.
Yeah.
So I kept wearing those, and eventually that problem went away. Mm-hmm. And I got a second pair, and I tried to redo their mobile fitting or the remote fitting process they did with me the first time, because I called a lot of this out initially. I was like, yeah, man, I've got like 1 3/8 inches in front of my toe. That doesn't seem right. And I ended up sending both that and the second pair back. And even though I had 6 months of wear in that pair, they were nice enough to take the boots back with like a 10% or 15% restocking fee. Cool. And the thing is, it was their sizing process that messed up, right? Like I did the remote sizing. That's the whole reason I did that, because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how the boots were supposed to fit at the time. And it was actually Kyle from Viberg Boots that got it nailed down. So they had me send in 2 specific ones that a lot of them don't. Most of the guys, except for Wesco's and Baker's, ask you to do it standing up and have someone trace you and do all the stuff, right?
Yes.
Baker's wanted a standing up one, and they wanted a sitting down one. And the reason for the sitting down one is when you're sized for boots in person, apparently they do it sitting down, not standing up. Wesco's, I have a custom last ordering for Wesco's for a faux Mr. Lou, because obviously my foot isn't going to fit in a Mr. Lou. So I have the only Baker's 65th anniversary tan Latigo custom boss in a what is going to be almost a 5F or a 5E shoe from Wesco. So yeah, so Kyle basically took the stylings of the Mr. Lou, like the triple stitching and all the stuff that kind of makes it and made essentially what is probably going to be close to a 5E version.
Wow.
So they do it sitting down. And Wesco's, when you do the custom last, because they'll build the last specifically to like how I measured and traced my foot, they'll put the last down and they build it up in the areas and they put the tape exactly where it's marked. That's why you see those marks on my measurements. Those didn't go to Wesco. You had to do it on Wesco paper, but those marks are where I had the tape so that the person using them knows exactly where to put the tape to double against my measurements. I sent those to Baker from or to Baker's Boots, and Kyle's like, yeah, man, you're a 6.5 double F. And I was like, man, there's no way. I'm wearing an 8 here. How do I go all the way down to a 6.5? That seems really small. Right. And he's like, let me see if I can find a pair of smoke jumpers in it and send it to you. So he looked and eventually he found a pair of 6.5 double F smoke jumpers and sent them to me. And I put them on, and he's like, son of a gun, he's right. Damn. Yeah. So now in the smoke jumpers, in the whites, they're a little narrower on the toe. So I do factory stretch the whites. They fit and they worked. So that's when I got this is the only pair from the originals, which is the Bounty Hunters. I've got about probably 2,100 hours in these or so. Wow. This heel has not been fixed, but I have fixed the other heel. So they're not terrible. Like I said, I do a lot of grass walking and stuff. But they've got some wear on them. My toe is pretty bacony. I've got a nice good divot going there. And obviously my ball pushes out on this side, and then the other part of my foot, like there's where you can really see that side of my waist really pushing out there on the boot. For sure. as you can see from this direction, like adding an unnatural extra push on the double F pair that's been stretched.
Yeah.
That's what this roll right here is specifically for, is my waist pushing that out right there.
That makes sense.
But yeah, so like I said, I've got a number of hours on those. This heel was the heel that Frank's just fixed recently. So this is a brand new heel as of probably 3 weeks ago or so.
Okay, cool.
Due to this particular left boot, unfortunately didn't make it through whites very well. There was a ledge on the inside that I had problems with that Junior from Frank's was able to knock down for me, but this one wasn't leveled right. So this is actually a really good point. I don't know if I can show this. One of the problems with sizing that a lot of people have issues with is when you get that like feeling of like kind of like, the Lex Luger Macho Man Randy Savage torture rack over your where you're just being stretched over the arch support of your arch, and it just kind of fatigues your boot. And a lot of that comes from when a boot is flat like this, there should be about an 1/8 of an inch gap that this is off the ground and no more. But every now and then you'll get a pair that like it's leveled on their leveling machine of any of the brands, but it's not leveled straight. So it kind of raises it up like this, and they get too much material here, and you get this kind of high raise on it.
Okay.
I have a picture I can send you this actually that I'm wearing the golf green pair right now. So I can't, that's
cool.
This pair here.
Oh man. Those are,
they are definitely getting there. Yeah, they're definitely getting there.
Those are my favorite pair of yours, I think. I mean, they're just so beautiful. Oh man,
they are a wild pair.
That rich, like emerald green. Oh yeah, insanely good.
So when I first got them, I noticed this in the right heel right away, or left heel right away. Sorry. And a lot of people have this problem where they don't know what's wrong or how to explain it, but like one foot just gets fatigued over the arch support way more than the other. So the boot on the right is correct. The boot on the left is leveled, is the right distances, but that extra gap up is because it's not 100% straight on the leveling machine somehow. I don't know exactly what causes that, but I had that same left boot problem with that Bounty Hunter pair for the longest time.
Yeah.
And I've had both of those fixed and leveled, and I also sent the one of them in the sun, and they're like, this Dublin almost looks metallic in the sun.
Yes.
It is something else. Like if anybody takes anything else from this, like Chrome XL is a good star leather and all.
Yes.
Dublin, so much better.
Yeah.
It's got a better temper. It's softer. It doesn't clap in on itself, and it molds a little bit better. Definitely. Dublin's the way to go. It's literally veg tan, like that is tanned the same way shell cordovan is. In terms like shell cordovan oils and stuff. Much better. Yes. That and the other better starter leather than Dublin is oiled Latigo. That is, it's stiffer. The first couple days it'll be stiffer, but it molds so quick. Like two 2-hour wears, and it's got your ankle bone molded in correctly, and it's got the mold of your foot just spot on. That now keep in mind, for those that know, Latigo or Latigo, some people pronounce it both ways, is a wet mold leather that was originally where you sit on a saddle. So the original leathers of the oldest style are like your English bridle, which is the actual bridle of the horse, and then the wet mold leather, which is the Latigo, which is where your butt sits. That's how they shape it, is that wet mold, and that's what it is. And oiled Latigo is basically 50% wet all the time with all the oils, so even faster molding.
Exactly. Yeah, and I was going to ask you how the Dublin compares to the Latigo. I'm American, so I say Latigo. But
so in terms of it, yes, they are very similar. In terms of like shape and mold, in terms of it, the Dublin is quite a bit softer. The Latigo is stiffer, but the Latigo molds a little faster. I would say the Dublin is like one, they can last the ever living crap out of the Dublin. Like they can get it like perfect to the last size, stretch the ever living tar out of it. But the Latigo is going to be a little looser just because they can't quite stretch as much. It's definitely a bit stiffer. Like if this is a 6 on the temper scale, this is close to an 8. Overall, I think the Dublin makes the more comfortable long-term fit in terms of like your perfect sizing, but but it's not the most durable leather ever. In terms of durability, you're in Chrome XL leathers. The difference is Dublin is struck through, So you don't get those nasty brown scratches you get with Chrome XL.
Definitely.
You get the lighter pull-up color under there. Whereas Latigo, I think, is just in general going to be a tougher, more durable leather in the long term. And as I said, because you get these really hard, like this real hard mold line here, that is because of oiled Latigo. That is not like something you're going to see in Dublin. Like my Dublins have that line. It exists, but as you see, it is nowhere near as pronounced. Nowhere near as pronounced as that Latigo.
Definitely.
As you can see, it's nowhere near as pronounced as the Latigo is. And here's a great, actually, you know what? This is perfect. This will also kind of show just like how much more it molds.
Interesting.
Yeah. Hands down, the two best starter leathers. Unfortunately, they're both premium upcharges.
Yeah.
But compared to a Chrome XL, so these are really new, but they're that's not showing up on camera. There's one scratch right here where you can see the actual brown undertone from the rough out coming through, and this is a darker one because it's natural. But whenever you've seen like a pair of like beautiful color 8s with a scratch, it is the ugliest light brown scratch that ever existed under it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that's for sure. Here, my Wolverines in color 8 Chrome XL.
Yeah. Right there on the toe. Oh yeah, it comes through.
See that teeth boring?
Yeah. You know, I heard an interesting story from Gabbard about T-core. T-core is really popular, but T-coring isn't like a actual real thing. So T-coring is what they call it now, but originally it was called overspraying, where what guys in the 30s and 40s would do when they got back from the war is they would take their brown leather jackets and overspray them with black automotive pigments to make them black. And then for that brown to show through, that's what they used to call super horsehide like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's actually just overspray. It's not like actual real dyeing. It's very interesting. We just call it T-core now because it's like a fast track to patina kind of.
Yeah, definitely. It's just a surface layer paint, essentially, if you want to think of it like that. And then after any amount of wear or scuffing, it's just going to scrape through and you'll see it because it's not struck through. It's not completely impregnated into the leather, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's surface level, cosmetic surface level is all it is. So, but that makes a lot of sense. And that brings me to another point that I wanted to talk to you about. You've been talking to Gabbard a lot lately. You really brought a lot of perspectives, opened my mind to how he works, because apparently he doesn't just want to make you boots. He wants to talk to you and get to know you. And in that approach, he's actually assessing whether or not you'd be a good customer fit for him, which I think is fascinating because, so many people, they're trying to sell their stuff. They don't care who buys it. But then somebody like Gabbard, he's making each pair 100% by hand. And, he's going to put a lot of time, invest a lot of his own personal time into each pair of boots that he makes. He wants to make sure that you're basically the right kind of customer for him, because he's of a very high intellect, and he wants to make sure that, his customers basically match on a certain level, the level of intellect and interest and appreciation that's going to go into it, because he's not selling fast fashion boots at all. He's selling something to you, almost as a friend, almost as somebody that you would know in real life who would build you something custom. That's the service he's providing. And so essentially he's in a sense, he's vetting his customers before he proceeds, because I can see now why he does that, because I've made a couple bags where the customer they backed out on me, and it's kind of without that interpersonal connection, that relationship, that could 100% happen. And it's not just from a financial perspective. He wants to make sure that the person that gets his product is going to actually love and appreciate it too. And he doesn't want to waste his efforts on, basically somebody that's buying these as a trophy or buying these as a splurge buy or as an impulse purchase. He wants to make sure that his products are going to the right people, that's going to actually love and care for and use his boots. So you've been talking to him. You told me recently that your shortest conversation with him so far was what, 2 hours?
It's like an hour and 50 minutes. Yeah.
That is awesome.
Well, the flip side of that too is it's not as uncommon in the bespoke world. When you meet with a bespoke dress shoemaker or a boot maker, much like Gabbard, they're going to have a couple consultation meetings with you. One of the most famous ones is, White Cloud in Japan. And they talk about the stories where he'll, present you with snacks, talk about what you want, walk you around his neighborhood so that he can vet you. It's really in the bespoke world very common for that to be the case. It's because one, most of those guys want clients, not customers. They don't want people coming in because they won't buy stuff off the shelf. But number two is they tend to lose money on the very first boot they sell you in the bespoke world, especially in bespoke shoes where they're making you last from wood. Mm-hmm. They're losing on the first boot. They make their money back on the next boot or shoe you buy, the next 2 or 3. And then on the flip side, if you get a bespoke pair, a made to measure pair from like Brian from Roll Club, Parkhurst from KREOSOTE, you really should send it back to those guys for rebuilds and resoles. It's their boots. They know what they're doing. And in the bespoke world, it's considered a gesture. Very rarely will a different bespoke maker resole your shoe that was made by somebody else unless that, maker is passed on.
Wow.
It's not, it's a one, you are just as much as they're investing in you, you are investing in them.
Yeah.
One. And then number two, it's just kind of a respect thing. I'm sure just like with everything, there's, there is exception to every rule. There's always going to be, maybe the 1 or 2 guys that don't do what the standard norm is or so on and so forth. The reason, like when you talk to a guy like Gabbard, that he doesn't do like lots of customizations to his stuff, because I have asked for some customizations in the 2 pairs I have on order. I'm sure others have too. Everything with his stuff is designed to a T. Like he's not going to adjust heel height. He's not going to adjust toe spring. Colors are kind of up for debate, but a lot of the stuff is, if you there's something you don't like about that style, the answer is more pick one of the other styles. There is a science and kind of a beauty to that to a certain extent. And there is with a lot of these guys that, their patterns really aren't meant to be messed with, because when it comes to like a lot of boots, like I said, the aesthetics are what drive the design factor of it, right? So like if you've got, your vamp attaching to your uppers in a specific way, if you've got your heel in a specific style with a specific breast look, it's all done on purpose. Making adjustments to it can compromise the last. I don't 100% remember the story, but the reason it's called a last is the boot starts and stops with the last. That's why it's called the last. It's the last thing. It comes from a German word. I think, if I remember right, I think that saying comes from Lee Miller at Texas Traditions, and other people have reset it. Not 100% positive on that though. So the boot starts and stops with the last. The shape, the flow, all of it's based on the last. You can't just take a last and make it flow into something else. A lot of these are geometrical 1-to-1s. A good example of that is these zeros that I have are the same way too. These, and much like other Japanese makers like John Lofgren. Well, I know John Lofgren's American, but the boots are made in Japan. Yeah. This is not, bottom part is not made with the boot last. This is, so zeros is a little different with the toe spring and stuff. This is a little bit closer to a cowboy boot style last. But like the Lofgrens, if for anyone that has a Lofgren, those are made with a derby dress shoe last on the bottom. And this is similar too. So when you put this on and it fits well, you don't feel any of the shaft at all. It's galoshy enough, like a pair of galoshes, that like it feels like you're wearing a shoe that just has extra stuff on top of it. And part of the thing is, you see how this shaft is fairly straight. If you look at a cowboy boot or like really high quality like English riding boot, this right here tends to curve in a little bit. And you can see it, you can't, that's a low arch one, so it's not as important. But for the high arch ones, you need area for that throat to pass. And the reason this has a little bit of curve is to allow a little bit of heel room back here. But there's a process in the cowboy boot world called narrowing the pipe or closing the pipe, where they take these really funky measurements and have you like contort your foot in different ways to get the math on this right so that they can shrink it in more and make it less galoshy.
Okay.
Yeah.
What you're saying. Yeah, because these are very galoshy. These are
extremely... yeah, unless you get like one of like Gabbard's Parlor Ska engineers, like a boot from someone like Dominic Casey who does the riding boots. I'm not sure if Brian asked for those on his engineers or not. But if you go and get like a cowboy boot done, they will have you do things like, one is like you'll sit your foot flat, one you'll curl it up like this, and you'll take the measurement from the ball to your heel. One, you'll do it like on the top of your toes, and it's all about getting that geometry of getting down through the shaft and that curve correct. And then that way they can really bring that shaft in once they have the correct geometry built into it.
Wow.
Anyone who's interested in that, I suggest reaching out to like guys like Rocket Buster, maybe Texas Traditions, or if you're interested in a pair of Gabbard's Parlor Ska spray gun, talk to him. He'll kind of explain that a little bit more. There's a lot of math and science that goes into that. I'm not going to even attempt to try to explain that there, but it's some of the weirdest measurements I've ever had to provide. I will tell you that much.
It sounds like it. Wow. Yeah. That is getting into a level of specificity I didn't even know existed. Yeah. These are some fairly simple engineers from Renav Goods and natural crushed shell cordovan. The curvature back here, well, it's warped a lot because I wore this shaft. It's super easy to get in and out, and I really like the fit. Though this bumped toe, a lot of people like their engineers to be a little bit more sleek of a profile. This has a little bit more toe bump there. I think the Indonesians do a really good job with their designs. I don't have any I did my custom measurements for this, and they are very good. It's a very good fit. But yeah, they didn't, to my knowledge, I think he did the instep according to like my exact measurements. But in terms of the shaft, the throat, I'm pretty sure that's a fairly standard measurement there. Like you said, when it's on my foot, I forget about this part. It's just doesn't feel like there's much there. So
and that's the reality of it. I mean, on a taller shaft, it's going to matter more. Like when you get into the traditional 10 and 11 inch shafts, that measurement becomes even more important. Like the ones I showed, those are just 8 inches. Yeah. So like I said, in the taller shaft, it's going to matter a lot more. Yeah. And at the end of the day, the boot that fits and the boot you like the look of is the right boot. But there's reasons why, we should make informed decisions and do one thing versus the other.
Definitely.
And it's kind of just the way of the world. It's one of my bigger issues with something like the patina stitch down Thunderdome. Mm-hmm. Bringing a new boot in, one, feels like a marketing mechanism to sell boots. But number two, like I feel like a lot of those guys probably don't wear those boots again once that Thunderdome's done. They put it on a shelf and it's a trophy.
Yes, exactly. I can tell you that's what I did with these. Like I haven't worn them since the Thunderdome ended, and in fact, like I actually didn't enroll in the second Thunderdome, just because I feel like I'm always in a Thunderdome anyways. I like to wear my boots on my own terms, and I feel like sort of, I don't know, that commitment to wearing one pair constantly, it started to get sort of tedious. I don't know, maybe I'm just not disciplined enough, but I got kind of, I love these boots, but it felt like more of a chore to wear them than a joy, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a wonderful competition. I think it's really good. I just don't know if it's for me per se. That said, I might re-enroll in the third one. We'll see. But for now, I just needed a break. That was 6 months of just nonstop. And then when the last 6 months were over, it's like, oh, it's already time again. Like I just wasn't ready for it.
We almost had to have a pair of boots prepared for the next one beforehand too. It's tough. And if you looked, I've seen this stuff come through Instagram this year, and everyone's doing natural boots. Like it's like, oh, it's a fast track to patina. It's kind of where I feel like the T-core problem is. Mm-hmm. And it almost feels like it's encroaching fast fashion a little bit, some of those T-core boots that it's like, or those really, light patina that they get paint stains on and stuff to really enhance that patina. It's like, do you going to feel proud to wear that in 5 years? Is that going to be a boot you're going to put on in 5 years? I mean, the quality of boots that go into that competition are supposed to be stuff you have for a decade or more. Mm-hmm. Like these aren't like, people taking in a pair of Iron Rangers. These are guys that are doing anything from, the Indonesian boots that are going up in price, very quality boots, to, $1,000 Vibergs, $1,000 Pacific Northwest boots, or even more. Maybe someone puts in there new creosote nail shanks, or, lace to toe roll club veg tan. Mm-hmm. And it's just these aren't, it almost feels like it's more about beating boots up sometimes than just wearing them.
Yeah, exactly. Some boots didn't even make the final cut. Some guys wore holes through the uppers. I'm like, come on, those are clear contenders for the top. And I'm not a judge. My pickings would have been completely different. I wouldn't have said that I would have picked mine, But what I am saying is that there were some that I would have definitely ranked differently if it were up to me. You know, why it's my friend, and he understands a lot about boot patina, and he really appreciates a graceful patina, not so much like a destroyed patina, but like a, you know, a patina that evolves very naturally without much conditioning, only when needed, really. And you know, just he could tell when a boot's been properly worn, properly loved. And that's why I completely respect his perspectives, because you know, his grandpa worked for Alden for 60 years. His family's a shoe family. You know, they've been doing this their whole lives, and so he really understands. I think not just construction, but also implementation, how a boot's supposed to be used, how it's supposed to be worn. Yes, while Alden does use the, what is it, the composite leather, the
yeah, so the midsole is the it's not fiberboard, it's like a rubberized leather, and they use a split veg tan leather insole, so it's missing the top grain. It's the splits, which is kind of like a suede split. It's a comfort thing. It's not necessary to use a thinner insole.
Yeah, exactly. He brought up a really good point, I think, which was that Alden, they're set in their ways. They're doing what works for them, for their clientele, for their customer base. And not all their customers want a boot with thick pieces of veg tan all inside the lining, because frankly, they're not standing all day. A lot of these guys are office workers. They're not walking, you know, these aren't sold as like NICKS work boots. You know what I mean? They're not fighting fires and on their feet all day. They're sitting down in an office, and they want to look good, and they want to feel comfortable. And frankly, that reconstituted leather is more comfortable from the onset. Does it last as long? No. But for somebody like that, you know, a white collar working class professional, that doesn't matter. You know, they don't want to be standing on wood all day long. You know, like in NICKS and whites, like that's what you feel. You're feeling that thick veg tan, the layers of it gives you so much support, and I really appreciate that. Your standard common professional, that's not what they're looking for, and they don't want, you know, they don't want to be standing on thick leather all day. And not to mention, he compared Edward Green to Alden. He said Edward Green uses the same stuff, the reconstituted leather in their insoles and midsoles, and Edward Greens are like $1,300. You know what I mean? And so very high level, and John Lobb too, very high level shoemakers are using these methods as well. And he was saying that like Alden, yeah, they're just set in their ways. They sort of operate, their operating procedures are sort of impervious to the outside world. They do things their way. They're still in business for a reason, and that I have to respect. Like, yeah, they aren't shifting on a dime like a lot of like a lot of these boot and shoemakers are. You know, they're not working on fast fashion. They're selling to a particular group of people, and these people are also, you know, they're Alden aficionados. They're lifelong fans. They love the brand. For that reason, it's like, yeah, this Alden is doing something right. They're still in business, and the choice, and it's a choice not to use veg tan in every single layer. They make that choice to use, you know, more flexible materials that will degrade quicker over time, but it doesn't matter because it's the application. Again, what application are you using your boots for? Because they are tools. And yeah, I've worn Aldens for 8 years now. I love them. I've never had an issue with the comfort at all, you know. And now that I have Grantstone, I definitely appreciate the more thick leather between my feet and the ground. It gives me so much more support. But that's not everybody's goal or vision. In fact, right here I have, so yeah, so these are a pair of iron boots, and these are $900 boots, believe it or not. Now, does this look like the most chunky tank badass boot you've ever seen? Hell no, it's not. It's very sleek, very refined, almost looks like an Edward Green, based on the last shape and everything. Yep. But as you can see, I think there's only 2 layers of leather on this sole. So it's not the beefiest sole. It's not the most overbuilt boot in the world. It's very refined. And when I was reading the Iron Boots website, they said, our goal is not to build tank boots. Our goal is to build good, easy wearing lifestyle boots that are comfortable out of good materials, but are they going to last forever? No, absolutely not. And are you going to fight wildland fires in these things? No.
For a week, about a week.
Yeah, exactly. But they do this just because of their vision, and it comes down to what's the company's vision. What vision do they have for their shoes? Are they trying to build the most everlasting boot ever, or are they trying to make an easy wearing but really good quality shoe? And I think that's what these iron boots do. They didn't build tanks. They built something that's, I could almost guarantee that there's some reconstituted leather in here too. I haven't really worn them, but I could tell, like, and not to mention the last shape, this is clearly a dress boot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That really opened my eyes, so are Aldens overpriced? In my opinion, yes. But to certain people, like you said, the price is worth it if it's worth it to you. So
it fits everything, right? Like even in his video, Weston kind of skates over the fact that his best fitting last is a Wolverine 1000 mile.
Mm-hmm.
None of us are going to argue that the Wolverine 1000 mile, even though it's quite a bit cheaper than the Alden, is still a kind of crappy construction for the price. Like the fact that you could potentially get a recycled carpet pad instead of cork in the gap for the Goodyear welting is a little ridiculous.
Yeah,
totally. But I mean, once again, if it fit, it starts and stops with the last. If it's the last for you, it's the last for you. And from there, it's just like, okay, this last works. This company maybe doesn't make the most high quality boot that I want. Now you know what last you're looking for in the wild. And chances are most of the other boot makers will know what their lasts are comparable to. Like, yeah, this one in the 1000 mile boot is the best fit I have. I'm sure Grant Stone will be like, oh, this is the last of ours that's going to most closely match that. And I guarantee the other boot makers out there have something similar or can, assist with getting something very, very close.
Definitely. When I look at the landscape of all the different brands, I mean, there's so many out there now. Oh my God, it's so difficult to navigate now. When I was getting into good shoes, it was like just a handful. You had Alden, you had Viberg, you had Alfred Sargent, Trickers, some of the England based shoemakers. But outside of that, you had Red Wing, Chippewa, Thorogood. But outside of that, Grant Stone wasn't around yet. Thursday wasn't around yet. There's so many new ones now. And they're really, because of the economy, well, at the time was good, but the marketplace sort of created a lot of good opportunities for innovators like Grant Stone to come onto the scene and say, hey, I could do this.
My biggest fear with Alden is they're slowly becoming like a Gucci sneaker. You're not buying it because it's quality. You're buying it because of the brand name on it. And me personally, I'm of the opinion that the boot should stand alone. Mm-hmm. The brand should stand alone and they should be better together. And it's certain, if they priced the Alden Indy at $450, nothing would touch it with 10-foot stick. Like it wouldn't even be close. It would be the market winner. It'd be a market decimator.
Yes.
But when you get into that 610, if it wasn't for the most recent leather hike from Seidel, which most of the Pacific Northwest guys, they don't tell you the leather manufacturer, it's Seidel. Because of that, they're about $40 more expensive than the Indy, but all of theirs, including the original boot the Indy's technically based off of, which is the original weekend boot from 32, is the white semi-dress. It's like the boot that even started the idea of a service boot. Mm-hmm. is the semi-dress. And if you look at like the Japanese World War II boots, they're very much a boondocker style that is 100% based off of the semi-dress as well in a lower arch. So like it's funny how a lot of these styles really were created by whites, who is the oldest of the shoe companies. A lot of people don't understand. They go back to 1852, pre-Civil War. And they started in Virginia pre-Civil War. And after the Civil War, they actually moved out to do loggers in Spokane, Washington.
Oh, I didn't realize they started in Virginia.
Yeah, they were originally in Virginia. Like there's definitely English brands that are older, but I don't think there's a single American brand that's older than that. It's just one of those things that if you look through the history of like White's boots, every boot we have now is probably going to be loosely based off it. The only ones that like, besides the like super unique guys, right? Just like in like kind of the wartime effort, Alden's methods are looking at a heritage crowd, right? Like
Yeah.
the indie is definitely a heritage crowd facing boot, is definitely become very popular since the heritage boom of the early 2000s.
Oh.
I just think there's a couple things they could do at its price point to make it better. At $40 more for a pair of like white semi-dress, that is a hand welted stitch down, but still a hand welted boot versus a machine Goodyear welted boot. It's just not even close. Like for $40 difference in price,
Yeah,
the whites wins all day long. And the thing is, in their casual line, you can get the thinner insoles. You don't have to get the thick stuff. And I think some of the like cuts they do that are for comfort can be done better, but they wouldn't be as economical as they are now. Like there are comfort adjustments that are definitely also affected by the price of the deal. At the same time, I mean, realistically, if Alden is your thing and it's too expensive, unless you have a massive problem with made in China, Grant Stone's your winner. I mean, the lasts are, I don't want to say identical because they're not quite, but they're pretty darn close.
Yeah, pretty close.
Yep.
I would say that their Leo last combines the best elements of the True Balance and the Berry, which are Alden's two biggest sellers. In fact, but I like the Leo last just a little better. Yeah, so a little bit of a comparison there. Alden True Balance versus Grant Stone Leo. The Leo is just, I think
you can really see the difference on the bottom. If you show the bottom of it, you'll see that the True Balance does not allow a lot of waist room, whereas the Leo allows way more waist room and kind of sets your ball and your waist a little bit farther back in the same length.
Yeah,
that's why I said the True Balance last. Unfortunately for me, because I have a little bit longer toes. If you have long toes, the True Balance last sucks. And the other thing is like the one pair I have of Alden, which is a 6 triple E Indy number one. Thank God it's Chrome XL, because that took like 40 hours to stretch big enough and it's still too small. Wow. But my 6 triple E's are actually longer than all my 6.5 boots, just because when Alden adds the widths, one, I didn't know this until I talked to the guy at the Alden shop in San Francisco. Their main online guy's been there like 30 years. He's a hoot to talk to. Very interesting. Okay. There is no true like triple E last technically. The triple E's are the double E lasts that didn't quite make the cut. So like when the Shoe Mart sells the 4 E's and 5 E's, those are lasts that didn't quite work, that they made adjustments on when the lasting process failed. Like they're I don't want to call them like scratch and dent, but there is not necessarily dedicated lasts for the larger sizes from them.
Okay, that makes sense. That's fascinating.
Well, and it also makes sense with Grant Stone too, because Grant Stone usually does D, E, and triple E. There's no actual double E there.
Yeah, that's definitely. Yeah, I did notice that. Yeah, it's either E or triple E.
Yeah. So I'm assuming the process they use for triple E is very similar to the way Alden does it.
Probably. I would bet money on it, because so many of their construction methods are similar. Obviously I have probably 30 pair of Grant Stones at this point, just because the sizing works out well. Like you said, the sizing is everything, and not to mention they're just really good people. And the whole made in China thing, like I drone on and on about this, but I think if you're building your boots with integrity, I don't care where they're built. I don't care who makes them. If you're doing your trade responsibly and correctly, then the product will speak for itself. And anybody that has a problem with made in China, I've dealt with some trolls online, and I just tell them, try the Grant Stone, see how you like it. You will not be disappointed. I've never heard of somebody order Grant Stones and say, oh, this quality sucks. Like, nobody can say that. Nobody has said that, not to my knowledge, at least.
Because, at least not in good faith.
Yeah, not in good faith at all. That's the truth. And actually, speaking of made overseas, I haven't even unboxed these yet. I'll do it right now. I just got these Parkhurst in. These were made in Spain. This is their blue mock toe, and as
it's very Alden Indy inspired.
Looks very much like an Alden Indy. Yeah, the toe is a cosmetic stitched mock.
It's one less speed hook, it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so we got a split reverse welt there.
And it's definitely nice. It's also got a nice French binding along the top and along the eyelets. Very
Yeah,
clean French binding. It's a kind of a puffier one. So it almost kind of reminds me of a Pacific Northwest roll top, even though it's not.
definitely. Like I said, I haven't even really looked at them super close yet, but I'm blown away. I'm super impressed.
Yeah, you have to let me know how that heel counter is. It's pretty pronounced in the outside. I'm curious what that heel counter material is, because that looks a little too pronounced to be Celastic.
Yeah, I don't think it's Celastic. In fact, I could kind of crush it down. There's not a whole lot of support in there. There's some, don't get me wrong, but it's not as much as, but from my feeling, is what's in the Aldens. The Aldens are definitely like more reinforced in the heel counter.
Wonder if it's like a leather split with that paste they put on it, that German paste everybody uses.
Oh, that could be.
It's got a moose on it.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I don't know how to pronounce it or the name, but I've seen a million different people use it. A lot of guys use it as like to put into leather to make it like their own toe puffs, which is a toe puff is a leather toe stiffener that's like not structured but maintains shape.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I never underestimate the adhesives, because adhesives have really come a long ways in recent years, and yeah, they do a really good job with the support that it offers. You know, I would have previously been against glues and adhesives and stuff, but no, that stuff I use it now myself. Like it's phenomenal stuff. It really helps. It improves the temper of the leather and really keeps it keep its shape held very well. So
it's funny you say that, because the Pacific Northwest guys will all tell you the stitches are their backups. Like they're expecting the glue to hold. The stitches are the backups in case the glue fails.
Exactly. In my backpacks, actually, you have a couple. You know the center anchor piece that holds the D-ring that attaches to
the shoulder straps. Yeah.
Oh, actually, I have this piece. Before I stitch this on, I do glue it down. I have to rough up both sides of the leather, and then I seal that in place. I bond it in place, and then the stitches just hold it there forever. You know what I mean? But for in construction purposes, like that glue would hold. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's the stitches are back up. And to be fair, even for cemented construction boots, even though they're not the best construction, what causes them to fail is constantly flexing or the glue getting too wet and debonding. It really actually has not a lot to do with the fact that the glue just fails over time.
Definitely. I've had some cement bond welted Clarks. I walked in them for like 7 years. They never failed.
Yep.
They were just still going strong. So yeah, I've learned, as much as it pains me to admit, that glue isn't the worst thing in the world. It actually, everybody uses it. You know, stitching is better, but glue is not the worst adhesive method that you could use. It does work very well, as much as it pains me to admit.
Yeah, like I said, the biggest thing is, get them galoshes. Don't be walking in ankle deep water and cemented construction boots, because they will break down much quicker. That's where you will find glue failures.
It will definitely. It will no doubt fall apart.
So this is one of the things that I do like about the Dublin. When we talk about fit and how a boot should fit, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a very hard thing to explain to somebody, and where people really fall into sizing issues. When it comes to boot fit, unlike a tennis shoe where the sole should go past every edge of your foot so you don't roll out, that's not the case of a boot. But where another issue people find really big problems with fit is there is not like a guaranteed mechanism for how tight or snug a boot should fit.
Okay.
So understanding that, because everyone's got different pain tolerances and how much their foot can be compressed, how much they feel it. So people with veiny feet will need their shoes to be just a little bit bigger. And you can see that from the lasts and proportion of boots and how people wear them. Like a lot of times you can see someone who's wearing a boot and has their foot in it, and you could tell, hey, that's a size too big. Hey, that's a size too small. Like you mentioned engineers and the proportions people like in their engineers. The problem is most people want that really tight toe and it to look a particular way. So if you look at like Gabbard's, parlor ska, he's got that toe smashed down real tight, but he did that with geometry, not with reducing the size. Because I've seen guys wear, like, there's a pair of one of the new benzene Keeper 2s came out. I saw someone wearing a pair where you can see their toe on the top. Your toe box should not be so small that you can see your toenail and see the top of your toe. Like, while some people it's okay to feel like that push down and stuff on it, that's a real fast way for when your toenail gets too long to lift that toenail off. So like properly sized toe boxes and like knowing where your fit is. Because for some people, a sloppy fit is the only way it's not going to hurt their foot. And that's fine if that's the case. There are mechanisms to deal with that. If you need that sloppy fit, number one, leave it sloppy while you're breaking in a little bit. Yeah. And then you can do things like insoles to fill up the volume later. Start with a thinner sock and work your way up to a thicker sock. With the engineers, the first time you put them on, thinnest socks possible, even a correctly designed engineer is going to have a real tough as you get it in there. Yeah. And not only is it going to have that, it's even a geometrically perfect one. It's probably going to be fairly tight to get in the first couple times. Once again, should not be using a bag or any other like grease or anything like that, or soaking it. You shouldn't need to be using those methods. There's something wrong with the sizing if you're going to do that. But once you get in there, the fastest way to expand it a little bit is once you can get it in the first time or two, try to get the thicker sock in. It'll be uncomfortable for a little while. It should be slightly uncomfortable, not painful, not problematic, slightly uncomfortable. By the time you're 10 minutes into it, your foot will have adjusted, and you'll get it in there. Another good thing is in the evening, your feet are bigger than they are in the morning. Putting an engineer on in the morning is one, way easier. Number two, you can get on with thicker socks, and that can help free up a little bit of space there. If it's not horsehide, key there is horsehide doesn't stretch. You're not going to get half a size out of horsehide. You can get half a size out of cow. Horsehide, if it doesn't fit, send it back, cut your losses, sell it on Grailed, whatever it takes. Right. You're not going to get horsehide to stretch like that. But that tolerance of how a boot should feel is difficult because it's hard to know. But the biggest thing in terms of fit that like it really should be the case is your ball should be hugged in this area here. You should feel like this part of the boot is supporting your ball. The laces going close together is good, but they shouldn't be super duper wide. And if you've got a foot like mine, you're going to press this area out here. Like it's impossible to not press this out. But realistically, you should be able to press in, even new, press in a little bit. Like if you feel the foot and there's no leather press in at all, use a smaller sock, at least for a little while. Because there should be a little bit of flex. Because once again, when you're breaking in, you're creasing the leather. If it is so tight the leather can't crease, you're not going to break it in. And that's kind of another point that no one really talks about. They kind of say it's a personal preference. It's this. That's really not so much a personal preference. That's not quite as much up for debate. Yeah. What is up for debate is things like your last. Like when you talk about like the Pacific Northwest guys, this is an H, even though it's got a dogger heel and it's built up a little bit. This is an H&W last. Yeah. H&W versus 55. There's no like, ooh, this one's better for this reason. This one's better for that reason. It's really a preference at the end of the day. When I'm walking on concrete, the H&W is nicer. If I'm out in the yard, I previously lived in the Kansas City area. It's a little bit more hilly and mountainous. You got the Missouri Ozarks right there. Out in the yard, my old house was not flat by any stretch of the imagination. For those that have seen a couple of the pictures that I've put on like the FRANKS boot community and I've sent to others, I had a, pretty good 35-degree incline in my backyard and some rolling hills and stuff there. In that area of uneven, the 55 always wins. When I'm out with the dogs, I'm always wearing the 55 because walking around on uneven terrain, the 55 is a dream. It could be a little much on like concrete, but I found switching to a half sole for concrete walking fixes a lot of that problem. But like that fit and feel is, important. Another thing is like if you've got like a toe cap, for example, right? On the inside, your ball should not be past this first eyelet. If your ball is past the first eyelet, it's too long. but it also your ball should not be getting into the toe cap either. It should be resting in this gap here.
Okay.
So there are indicators because realistically, when this bends, I know the kilties here, so I pulled up a little bit. You know, one of the things you can do to help the creasing along the first time you wear it is put a brass rod here, bend your foot, put a brass rod here, bend your foot, pre-start those creases. It'll make it a little easier on you. And then I've heard of guys like Gabbard say the first time you get your boots in after you've worn for 10 hours, do get into a track stance with each foot for like 3 or 4 minutes to help really force all of those creases into exactly where your foot wants to bend. And that will greatly facilitate the break-in process. Now, he uses mostly Horween Latigo that he dyes himself and natural Wicket and Craig harness. They call it russet, but it's natural harness. So those are not quite the same as what other people would use. Obviously, in something like horsehide, it's going to be quite a bit different. But I think he uses almost exclusively cowhide. I don't think he uses any horsehide, or at least none that I've seen. So, you know, just simple things like that. So kind of getting those creases in place. But there are, even though length is probably the least important of the other pieces, because like another thing is, you know, like my Franks have a slightly wider heel cup. If the heel cup is pinching your heel or is like so sloppy you're sliding back and forth, like it's not as easy for them to expand the heel, but like for Franks and whites, they can go a heel size down, no problem.
Okay.
Going down a heel for them is very easy. Like they can do that without actually having to do a custom last order. Going up is a slightly different story, but they can go down a heel, no problem. Number one, a made to measure boot should not be your first boot.
Yeah.
You learn nothing else. That should not be your first boot. Because there's this danger, and there's a good thought process in this. Is like, you know, because I've got 2 pairs of KREOSOTEs on order. I'm thinking about another one. I've got a pair of roll clubs on order. You know, of those potentially taking over my small but rotation, right? You know, I right now I'm around the 11 or 12 boot mark, maybe 13. I'd have to go count. But of my casual boots, it's under 10 still. You know, I've got the ground pounders from Franks. I've got a pair of JKs. JK, for any people who are interested in JK, talk to them. Their sizing is proprietary. They're a little bit of a different boot brand. Do your research before you drive too much in JK. And then I have a pair of Franks Commander 1s. No, Commander 2s. I have the Highlanders. That's the slightly thinner. It goes from a 1-inch stack to a 3/4-inch stack for flexibility. So those are work boots. Those aren't considered my rotation. Those are if I actually have to do something that's hard work. It's like if I'm just in the data center and not on the ladder all day, because the data center is not in my state. So my company I work for, the data centers are in California and Vegas. So I have to obviously fly. I'll take a pair of work boots with me in case I'm on the ladder for multiple hours, because fiber cable, which is a fiber optic cable, not necessarily just like sand, but you can do FCOE and there's a bunch of different stuff. The IT people know. There's usually a trough or a what they call a raceway that you run all the fiber cable through to go from rack to rack.
Okay.
And it's because fiber can't be bent a whole lot. Like if you bend fiber too hard or take too hard of a 90-degree angle, you'll crack that core and it doesn't work anymore. So there's a raceway for fiber so that also other cables aren't pulling on it in most colos or data centers. In that process of doing that and getting all of that set up, you stand on a ladder and run that cabling through, especially if you're going from, usually you have a side and a B side. Well, if you're going from this guy here, you've got to run the whole horseshoe to go to this guy here. So you spend a lot of time on a ladder running this stuff. So days like that, I'll make sure I did the custom boot build. It's just a custom pair of JKs. I have those or the Franks Type 2 Commanders, which is the Highlanders, on hand. That way I've got them with me. They're in my bag. I brought them on the flight with me in case I need those on the ladder. But for the regular days, my casual stuff works. I also try to bring my ground pounders because if you're walking around a bunch on those raised panel floors, the wedge sole is perfect. I'm not a massive fan of the wedge sole personally. I have the 1 pair of wedge sole boots. I'll have a 2nd pair of wedge sole boots, and that'll probably be it for me. I prefer the heel, even if it's a low arch. I prefer having a heel versus not having a heel.
Okay,
just my preference. When it comes to just in general, my rotation's fairly small, and when you get into these made to measure guys, a lot of guys get into that and don't look back.
Yeah.
When people get these made to measure boots in that, just for a lot of people going to be the dream fit if they've never found the perfect last. The fear is them overtaking the rotation. And a lot of their other boots go into the side and being replaced with, your soon to be 2, 3, 4 pairs of creosotes, 2, 3, 4 pairs of roll club. Maybe you got one of the Indonesian makers to do like a custom fit to you. And suddenly a lot of your other boots falls out of the rotation. That's a lot of people's fear. So their thought is, oh, let me just go right into where I'm going to end up anyway, and we'll be good to go. And the problem is you haven't wore the boots to really know what you want or what you don't want. How many of us still have our very first pair of boots? There's a strong chance they've, been rehomed or moved to moved on, right?
Yes.
Whether with cash or handing it away or handing it down to somebody, there's a very strong chance it's gone on. And the thing is, you don't know what leather you like till you try it. And you broke it in. You don't know what soles you like till you try to broke it in. You can do a good educated guess, but at the end of the day, it's still something you have to try for yourself, right? And maybe there's reasons why you like it. Maybe there's reasons why you don't like it. I mean, I feel like in the heritage boot community, we unfortunately get a little too tied into validation. Your favorite, YouTuber, or the guys at Standard and Strange, or the people in the Stitch Down Patina Thunderdome shoe Discord. They don't need to validate your purpose. Like, just because they like a sole and you don't like a sole, great, wear the sole you like. There's a reason why you like it. I mean, Carl Morawski said the best. He did that Peanut Bison like 30 run collaboration with NICKS, and he absolutely hates the wedge sole on it. Like, he says, I'm putting that back to a heel when it's done. Doesn't mean wedge soles are bad because Carl Morawski doesn't like them. It just means that, it's not for him. And so, we don't always need to just seek validation from others in some of our choices. Sometimes we've made them the way we are. And even like my rotation, almost every one of my boots is using a different sole style for one reason or another, whether it's a V-bar, which is, by the way, hands down my favorite. Like, while the neoprene Alden is a great one, I think the V-bar is just superior in almost every single way.
Is sweet.
Yes, I like the full V-bar, the half sole V-bar. That has quickly become one of my favorites. I will take that over a mini lug any day of the week. I feel like mini lugs just gather dog poop and other things that
they definitely
take them out of the lugs, versus just being able to easily hose down a V-bar or wipe out a V-bar, no problem. Because like, if you need a lug, it needs to be a full lug. I
definitely.
I don't know. I have a number of boots with mini lug, and whenever their rebuild times come, they're not getting another mini lug put back on them. Let me tell you.
Right. Definitely.
just overall, like, that sense of like, validation, like what you like is what you like. You don't need others to validate that for you, but being able to articulate what you like and why is also important. It's everything when it comes to fit. If you can, I will never forget the days that, like, trying to explain to NICKS why that Falcon hurt my foot. Mm-hmm. And like, why, after about 15 minutes of wearing, like, I was limping for the next hour when I took it off. It was a difficult thing to explain. It took a while for me to be able to see with my eyes and get like, this is what the problem is. And it's a problem that when I first told them, they're like, you're absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until they saw it, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, there's probably something to this.
Yes.
Otherwise they wouldn't let me take a, Falcon with 500 hours of wear and, 6 months of wear on it and take it back for, 15% restocking fee. Even for them, weird shaped foots, odd shaped feet, like, obviously their methods work in 85% of all humans, right? I know the female feet are a little bit harder to do. They have to go a little stricter by sizing, just because, the different like compression of shoes and the stuff that women put their feet through sometimes with some of that fast fashion that exists. And unfortunately has become a common problem with men these days that really shouldn't be either. There is some stuff to work around there, but like, generally speaking, for the average foot, which average makes it seem like 50-60%, it's probably closer to 80. It's very, very easy, and there's enough data to quickly do it. For everybody else, there's not, and there's a lot of tricks to make it work too. The one thing that I think the Pacific Northwest guys are really lacking on is the slight tweaks on the odd sizes that could really do it. Like, a good example is on a really well set up pair of engineers, you'll see this really common on. And all the guys do this. Lofgren does it. Gabbard does it. Brian does it. If you look at the heel breast here, you see how it's cut back like this?
Yeah.
You can take the same size lift that you were going to use, but adjust this breast line right here to the size of boot very effectively by adjusting this cut right here. You just make the cut a little bit deeper, and you can use the same thing. And I think Gabbard's got probably one of the deepest cuts on these. But like there are ways that you can make adjustments for different sizes. A great example of this is Franks is nice enough to, they've given me a couple, but any boots I've sent back to them, you know, being a 6.5, the standard sock liner is too long that most of these guys use. So a little bit of it sits under the ball of my foot. So a lot of times, you know, I go in with a really sharp knife and cut that section out so that my ball is not sitting on it. Found that out because my original bounty hunters actually, they didn't skive it all the way. And there was a bump on that guy. And after a 5-mile walk, I was like, man, there's something poking the shit out of the ball, the bottom of the ball of my foot. And that's when I found that and cut that out for the first time.
Oh, dang.
But they've given me a couple of the shorter ones, and then they put shorter ones in my boots. Now, the Japanese guys like Zeros, I don't know, I'm going to attempt to show this.
Yeah.
Sure, if I can. It's really common in the Pacific Northwest, guys. I'm going to grab the flashlight on my phone to see if I can show what I'm talking about here. If you look at the inside of, oh boy, inside that boot there, you see that sock liner, how short it is? And it cuts off real quickly. You could do a real short sock liner like that only just barely goes past the heel. So if you look in there, that sock liner stops right about here.
Yes.
The very short sock liner. There is like ways you can go about that stuff that isn't the traditional. And I get it, you know, in the Pacific Northwest, guys, you know, they all have their like assembly line worker. They all have their station. They're each, you know, masters of their station. You know, they start in the finishing and sanding, and then they work their way up to the other ones, because the most, you know, two experienced ones is going to be lasting first, stitching second, and then clicking third. So, you know, the guys that are starting and brand new are doing heels, sanding, sock liners. Well, of course, they only know the sizes and the differences. And, you know, that's where you start in that industry. And Frank, one of the times I talked to him, always said it the absolute best. Sitting down and listening to a customer point to where their problems are and thinking about it from a bootmaker's perspective is important. And Frank's is one of the few that I feel like still does that. You get a lot of the same canned answers from the other guys that aren't 100% listening to what you're saying. I will say, if you want a very personal connection to your bootmaker and you're into that Pacific Northwest brand, I would highly suggest Frank's from that perspective. Like those guys between Junior, Ashton, Frank himself, and his wife, Michelle, they'll get on the phone and talk to you. They will actually remember the boots that are in your collection, remember their stuff that's gone through. They'll kind of treat you like other buddies you're talking about with boots, while they also make boots. That's a pretty personal connection that they do, that I've respected quite a bit. After you've got a couple pairs and you're comfortable with the size, they'll you can send them leather and they can make boots for you.
That is so
I don't know if they'll do it for a very first customer without a long conversation, but if you have a couple pairs through them, I have 2 pairs that I've sent hides for, and I have a third one that I'm going to be working on here soon. But after that one, that quote unquote 9th pair might be my last pair of Franks.
Yeah.
So,
well, they last.
Getting up there.
You know how that goes.
Yeah. Hey, good news is with my size, the chances of me being able to sell any of these to anybody else are so slim that, you know what, I'm stuck with them for life.
Right. Exactly. Who else is wearing that size? Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, someone must, because one of the pairs of Merriam horse rump I got from NICKS that I sent back, somebody ended up buying. So the NICKS at least has at least one other customer that's 6.5 double F.
Dang, that is awesome. Well, I think Carl Murawski, when he was custom fit for NICKS, I think they put him in something. It was like a 7 quadruple E or something crazy. So point being, your foot type might not be as rare as you think.
I mean, at least within that crowd, right?
Yeah.
You know, the Woodland Firefighter crowd, they get a lot of average guys that maybe wouldn't normally wear boots every day through, but it's still rare enough that, you know, like for example, you got guys like Parkhurst that rarely do anything outside of a D-Wit. Oakstreet Bootmakers is the same way. I don't think they do hardly. They maybe do like an E at most. And then I gave Truman a shot. You know, in that initial period, I had 2 pairs of Trumans that both got sold just because, one, they're adding width definitely adds length to it. But number 2, you know, I'm a 6.5 double F, and I was trying to make an 8 double E work. And the length was a little bit closer. I'd say in Truman, I'm a 7 or 7.5, because they're a little flatter. Definitely not a width thing. Like one of those boots that I gifted, I'm pretty sure my left foot was hanging almost an inch over the welt in the waist area. I tried real hard to make those work, and it just wasn't happening. Yeah, it was Rambler leather, so it's real soft too on top of it.
Yeah, someone, especially with your foot type, not having an easy go with trimming. Like I find their lasts to be, very accommodating, but at the same time, like, yeah, their 8.5 fits me perfectly, but the nines fit me well as well. But like if I had a super wide foot, yeah, they just don't offer the widths to be able to accommodate that. So that makes a lot of sense. This has been a phenomenal boot talk. I mean, super informative. I've learned at least a dozen things from you during this brief exchange. Hopefully the audience will as well. In fact, I know for sure that they will, because every time we talk, I'm just learning new things, new concepts, new things that I didn't even know were things to think about. So yeah, thank you for that. I mean, this has been just super illuminating. Hopefully this helps people out with their understanding of fit, and especially if they're of a strange or rare foot type like yours. Hopefully they, this will help them out in their sizing and their boot collecting journey. I have no doubt about that. It's going to be of very high value to the community.
I hope so. And if they got any questions, or there's a lot of questions in the comments, and you like have a list of follow-ups, we can always do a follow-up. Because I once again, this was a lot of like me kind of standing here playing teacher and talking a lot of information out. Question everything that I've said. Go look into it. Find this stuff. I have said a lot of things and did a lot of hand gestures and tried to show stuff that exist in ways that you can see with your own eyes, either it being made or exactly how it's set up on the internet. And for a lot of people, that extra bit of auditory to visual learning is where, it hits the sweet spot.
Definitely. You understand like just so much about it, and you've talked to many of these makers and FRANKS. I hear nothing but good things about FRANKS, working with them. They're on my radar now as well. So Bard, I think it's inevitable at this point. I'm going to have to order a pair of KREOSOTEs, even though that price tag is pretty fat,
Well, it's got a long wait time too. So for anyone that's looking, they're either between 36 and 38 months all the time. Now, Gabbard isn't the oldest guy ever, so you don't have to worry about that so much. He is a younger man. I'm not gonna say his exact age, just because I don't know if it's public or not.
He's not in his what is it? His golden years.
He's not he's not older than 50. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, exactly.
So the biggest problem we have with the weight, besides the 3-year wait itself, is if any of us get like our foot amputated or something like that. That's going to be your bigger concern. It's not so much on Gabbard's side. It's going to be like the most unfortunate, or the loss of limb, that's really going to sour that experience.
Yeah, exactly. God forbid. Let's hope everybody stays safe in the meantime while they're pending.
Yeah, please stay safe. Please do not contract diabetes or anything, or gout or anything that could adjust your foot. Now that's one thing, is both Brian and Gabbard will contact you within the last 4 to 6 months of your wait time and ask how your feet have been, how healthy you are, what changes have you had. So like they can adjust for those things, but just in general, it's best if you don't let them be a possibility in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. That's a fact. Yeah, because people's feet do change. Weight gain, diabetes, like you said. Yeah, having stuff amputated, which is more common today than not. So unfortunately, yeah, diabetes can cause limbs to rot off. I mean, it's not an unheard of thing. And look, and especially looking 3 years down the line, that would cause some people some trepidation, because waiting that long, none of us know where we're going to be in 3 years. So, but that's really good and reassuring that they reach out to you beforehand, because I was talking to the Happiness Carpenter recently, and yeah, his pair of KREOSOTEs, they just, for whatever reason, his foot changed and they just weren't fitting the way that he wanted to, but Gabbard hooked him up and built him a new pair of boots. He said, just send those back, and he built him a new pair that fit. It's like, wow, that's customer service right there.
I know he has bespoke things he can do to adjust the originals. It just depends. Like, once again, if you send him a second set of foot measurements and he looks through it, it might be more than he can do in terms of tolerances of adjustment. Yeah. And there's lots of things like, one of the biggest problems I've seen, and I've had this happen to me before too, is in the process of measuring your feet and having other people measure your feet, if you stretch that tape too much, it throws it out of whack.
Yeah.
sometimes people stretch it too tight over their foot for the measurement to begin with, and they just don't know because they don't know yet. But like those measurement tapes do get out of whack. So it's not always a bad idea if you like seeing funky measurements don't look right, lay it up against a tape measure and see how accurate it still is.
Definitely. The tape measure won't stretch.
There's just little weird things like that.
Whereas something like this, I could pull this and just put it all out of whack. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I have about five of these in my drawer.
Yeah.
Triple check what I'm doing.
It's just one of those realities. The other thing is, you should always measure your feet in the evening, never in the morning.
Yeah.
And then, the flip side is do it standing up and sitting down too, and note those separately. One of the things that Gabbard asked for that I've never been asked for is a side profile. And that was a challenge, where I took a backpack box from, I don't know, one of the vendors, I think it was Nutanix or something, and taped a piece of graph paper to it. And so that my lady friend could run the pen up and down on it. But it's a really weird measurement to do because you can't do it from the outside because, you got the full length of the pen and it wants to wobble a lot.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of times girls have those, in my opinion, ugly, but fake nails. And that likes to catch against the sock. So it's like this really weird trying to figure out an effective way of holding the pen like this while running it along the foot to get that measurement without it catching against the sock or anything weird. Like I said, nice trimmed up nails and stuff, holding like this shouldn't theoretically be a problem. But if you've got long nails or, those fake nails on, this is problematic. And trying to hold it out from here makes it, like real easy to wobble. Not to mention, with the width of my foot, you're holding, like you only have this much to touch the box anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
So it was definitely an interesting one. That was one that figuring out the box method to even have something to go up against was already a weird little challenge in of itself, because most of us think, oh, let's pick a wall in our house. Yeah, minus the baseboards.
Yeah.
Very few rooms don't have baseboards. So
right.
That was an interesting one. That's the only time I've ever been asked for that particular one. It's a useful one because there's something when I was doing the custom Wescos, the faux Mr. Lou for the wide foot, Kyle wanted them for that. And I sent them over to Kyle. I didn't send the physical copies because I'd already sent those to Gabbard, but I sent the digital copies I had of them so that Wesco could reference because they were interested in it as well. Oh, so it has come up before, like after, since I've mentioned that I've had them, that they were interested in them. But that's the first time I've ever actually been asked for it explicitly as a hard requirement.
I could relate with the measurement conundrums. My pair of benzines that I measured for myself just did not fit. That instep was just too big. The length and width was perfect, but just the instep, that this part just did not fit well. It's very difficult to do it yourself, especially, as a customer, we don't necessarily know like how to measure our feet, and not to mention like what's going to translate for the boot or shoemaker, in terms of building a piece of footwear that fits you just perfectly, so that's a big part of it is it's a process of learning for you too, being a responsible consumer is like, well, how the hell do I measure my feet?
They don't know how tight to make it. Like if you're between sizes, most of the boot makers are going to err on caution and go a size bigger because they don't know how much pressure your foot can take.
Yeah, exactly. And like you're saying, like somebody with a lot of veins in their foot, I suspect I have a very large amount of veins in my feet because if my shoes are too tight, it's just the most miserable experience. But for somebody with less veining, it going tighter, it just depends on so many things. Like you said, is your foot high volume or low volume, and just all this stuff, like me, I'm very sensitive when I get my foot into a pair of boots that are just too small. Like I feel the pulsating of my feet. I feel my pulse in there, and it's not good, and it's miserable. Constricts blood flow, and that has its own problems that it'll lead to in the long term. And like you were saying earlier, too much of that, you could start to aggravate with your toenails, and just the foot is not a fixed appendage. It splays out, it moves around, it's got muscles in it, it's got bones in it, it's meant to adapt. And like you were saying earlier too, a really interesting point was when you put your boot on, your foot actually adjusts to it within a matter of minutes. Like your foot the muscles and like my whites that I'm wearing now, like as soon as I put them on, they feel different 10 minutes later. Like as soon as they're on versus 10 minutes later, they feel just completely different. At first it's kind of like the arch support's kind of
It's intrusive.
yeah, it's a very intrusive feel at first, but then the more I wear them, the more that effect becomes dampened. But at the same time, like yeah, like right now, as compared to 3 hours ago when I put them on, they feel like different boots almost because your foot settles in there. They adapt.
Yeah, that the muscles. So for those that don't know, the reason, if you've done like the remote fitting process through NICKS or FRANKS or any of those guys, the reason they tell you to wear them for 15 minutes is it's so the muscles in your feet relax. When you're in tennis shoes, your feet are super tight because your muscles are maintaining all the arch and foot shape. But something like a 55 or even an H&W last, a 55 puts your foot in a very relaxed, like I'm sitting space.
Yeah.
The H&W is a little bit less than that. And it takes a little while for your feet to relax and let the boot give your foot shape, not make your foot maintain the shape and like a sneaker, which is also why when you take them off, you tend to want to sit on your toes a little bit more because your foot's naturally relaxed. And it takes a little bit for your muscles to tighten up back into the barefoot mode.
That makes sense. Wow, that is fascinating. Yeah, because when your foot's in a sneaker, I didn't realize that, but it's true. Like your foot's working to like it's putting stress on your foot because it has to work to maintain its arch and to maintain its shape and everything inside that. Whereas with a NICKS with arch support built in, it's like it gives your foot the chance to like actually relax, be at home. Your foot's not working overtime to hold its shape, and
that's exactly it. All your muscles and tendons stay tight to maintain your fluid motion at that point.
Wow.
And that's where like it starts and finishes with the last. The foot geometry is everything. This is a reason why on bespoke makers are not going to let you adjust heel height the toe spring, because it's the geometry of the last.
Yes,
it's the start and the last of the boot.
Fascinating.
Part of what I was talking about with the width, this pair of NICKS single stitch mock toe shows what I'm talking about. If you look at this from above, it is not the most pleasant looking mock toe from above. And a lot of it is this bump here, and it's got just a very odd, especially from an angle, odd shape to it. Yeah. This is an example of a company that makes a boot, and while they're trying to make this proportional and make sense, they're also making the fit right. So like in a lot of the brands, when you go up in width and whatnot to make it proportional, they would add length here to help hide this. Okay. And this is also where people with wide feet get confused. Like, yes, from the side profile and everything, it looks fine. Looks like a perfectly good mock toe. From the front, it's a little off, but they're trying their best to make the mock toe go between the rows of stitching here and match the box right here on both sides. Okay. Stitch box to hold it on. So that's what they're lining it up to. And it is tough with a wide foot to make that work. So when people talk about like, extra width and stuff being added, where that tends to add length, this is why. So, in that process of getting fitting and, the measuring and everything, like understand for wide feet, you're going to get some oddness like this. This is for a good fitting boot. It probably isn't going to look 100% correct in wide feet. It's just a reality. And this is kind of, where a lot of this, comes in. And this is a 55 mock toe, which is already a little different as it is. A well-fitting boot is a well-fitting boot, but aesthetics aren't 100% everything of it. When you get into wider feet, there's going to be balance problems. But, especially for people so the broken sesamoid bone issue, that is from the tendon so the sesamoid bones they track your big toe. They're just two bones that sit inside of a tendon one's a large like piece of rice size and one's like a pea size, and they track that big toe. So people sometimes get them taken out, but the problem is it causes their big toe to want to, instead of like this is the next toe and this is the big toe, to drift this way or drift this way once those are taking out. So these days they generally only take out one if they have to take it out, but that comes from that tendon being too tight and a tightness in like your calves and stuff. And in my case, it's just a little too short. There are people that is too short and they can extend it. They go into the back of your, just above your Achilles, a little higher than your ankle, and they add some extension in there. So that's not the case.
Okay.
It's probably also one of the reasons why wedge soles aren't as comfortable for me, is because wedge soles tend to be a smidge lower with the squish in the heel category. They're also not quite as supportive due to the squish as well. Like I said, you still have leather and everything there. It's just compared to rubber, leather stacked heel, or, big old chunk of Vibram squishy Christie, right?
Yeah.
Obviously the heel is more supportive. Like, is it supportive enough for most people? Absolutely. Like, it's still
Right.
like a 55 to a 60 Shore rating. In the terms of support versus not support, like it's very obvious one is significantly more supportive. Can the fiberglass shank work for most people? Absolutely. Is a steel shank stronger? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
That's a viable comparison of the two. But it's just, once again, that's where the foot feel and how it is so important, that like a good brand will sacrifice aesthetics to fit your foot correctly.
And that makes a lot of sense when you're holding up those NICKS. It does kind of look a little wonky, but it's going to be the right fit for your foot. And frankly, I think it looks pretty cool. I think it has like a good muscular, I don't know, shape about it. I think it looks pretty badass.
If you like that kind of bulbous toe Iron Ranger manly look, it's definitely for you. Like, I can 100% see that. But for someone that wants like a sleeker Thursday look, it's probably the ugliest clown shoe they've ever seen.
Yeah, exactly. And like I like my Thursdays, but the aesthetic of the lasts, I'm not the biggest fan of. But at the same time, like, yeah, some guys they like that aesthetic. But yeah, I like big, chunky, clunky looking boots in most cases. Parkhurst, they're a little bit more sophisticated in their silhouette, but it just all depends on what you're looking for. Well, awesome. This has been like the craziest, coolest boot talk ever. So much detail, so much information. I'm personally, when this releases, I'm gonna like listen to it like 5 times just so that I can really absorb the information, because it's coming at us so quick, but it's crucial to understand, I think. So anybody that's out there trying to really understand fit, I think this is going to be an invaluable listen for anybody who's had issues with sizing boots, me included, for sure, because I've had my own fair share of issues. Well, yeah, man, and like you said, this has been a lot of fun. I think we should do it again sometime in the future, a few months down the road, especially if people have questions. We'd definitely like to address those later too. So again, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much again for coming on with me today. This has been an outrageously good talk. So
yeah, not a problem. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me
everybody
too.
else did as well.
Absolutely. All right, my friend. Well, keep in touch, and I look forward to talking to you again here soon. So
sounds good. Thanks, Dale.
All
Thanks,
right, brother.
everybody.
Anytime. Thank you.